morning. I'd like to get the meeting started. One item on the agenda is labor update. We have nothing from the staff. I have one request to speak. John Raker.
Good morning, Honorable Mayor, Honorable Members of Council, Madam City Manager, members of staff. Name's John Rager, City Employee, 21 years. Just wanted to continue a little bit more from last week. I gave you some additional information this morning. I've submitted a contemporaneous promotion letter dated August 18th, 2011. It's one of the sentences on here says your salary will be set at the rate that gives you a minimum of a 5% increase in base pay from your environmental inspector position. Page 2, I have a wage history of the individual that had a 7% promotion, a 5.14% promotion, and a 4.94% step increase. Pages 3 to 5 will go into detail how the spreadsheet works. Compensation history of employee 1, 3 cents per hour raise. It goes into detail on that. Going on page 9, logic behind the spreadsheet. Page 10 will be the composition history of employee number 2 and their 1.6% promotion raise. Let me get to the rate of harm here. Employee 1 was harmed to the tune of $5,008, and they need to be reassigned to Inspector 2, Step 4 of 9. Currently, they're Inspector 2, Step 2 of 9. Employee number 2 is harmed to the degree of $3,488. They need to be reassigned to Inspector 1, Step 4 of 9. They're currently Inspector 1, Step 2 of 9. Employee 3 was harmed to the tune of $1,940, and they need to be, their anniversary date was yesterday. They should be Inspector 2, Step 8 of 9. Currently, they're Inspector 2, Step 6 of 9. They received partial remuneration sometime in December, so that can be taken off the amount of harm that was done to them. I have another inspector that a 12% promotion. They went from assistant inspector to Inspector 1, and that one was correct. But there's kind of some kind of strange there in their step increase. They're being shorted a penny an hour, so it's like $20.80 a year. My recommendation for correcting that is just, why are we, being off like 1 to 2 cents an hour on these step increases? Sometimes they're low, sometimes they're high. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So the last page, I have proposed resolutions, and I provided 4 copies of that for you today. Please feel free to contact me anytime. Thank you.
Concludes public testimony, concludes labor update. We're going to adjourn into closed session. We'll be back here at 1:30. Councilmember LICCARDO will introduce the invocator.
Thank you, Mayor. It's my great honor to introduce a man who's been here before, needs no introduction, and a good friend, the very Reverend David Bird. Reverend Bird has been Dean and Rector of Trinity Cathedral in downtown San Jose since 2003, having previously served as Rector of an Episcopal Church in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. In true ecumenical fashion, I know David, although he is an Episcopal rector, his graduate studies focused on the Vatican. On a national level, for the past 15 years, he's been ethics consultant for a national review board involved in overseeing research and development of new treatment of infants with sickle cell anemia. He served as an ethics consultant for more than 10 years at the NIH in Bethesda and National Institutes of Health. And locally is where he has had such a great impact here in our community. He's been a real leader and integral partner at St. James Park and the surrounding community. The church at Trinity, the cathedral, houses 5 12-step programs to reunite formerly incarcerated parents with their families. It houses an office for the Downtown Streets team, which is an important outreach component in our homeless strategy, and is home to a weekly distribution program by Second Harvest to needy elderly residents in our downtown. Thank you, Reverend Bird, for being here.
Thank you very much. Councilmember LICCARDO mentioned Georgetown. First time I ever used this meditation was in Georgetown when we were doing the revitalization of part of the downtown and doing new building. It's called The Brick. It was written in French by Michel Croix, and it was a new type of meditation in its day. The bricklayer laid a brick on the bed of cement. Then, with a precise stroke of his trowel, spread another layer, and without a by your leave, laid on another brick. The foundations grew visibly. The building rose tall and strong to shelter us. I thought of that poor brick, buried in the darkness, at the base of the big building. No one sees it, but it accomplishes its task, and the other bricks need it. What difference does it make whether I am on the rooftop or in the foundations of your building, as long as I stand faithfully at the right place? Thank you.
Thank you, Father Bird. Appreciate it. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item, business, or the orders of the day. Are any changes to the printed agenda that we need to consider? I have no requests. Is there a motion? Motion is to approve orders of the day. On that motion, all in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Orders are approved. Closed session report. City Attorney?
There's no report.
We'll move to the ceremonial items. I'd like to start by inviting Jane Adams, Executive Director of the California Park and Recreation Society, to join me at the podium for a presentation of a certificate of recognition.
I come with many. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. Appreciate it very much. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and the council for the City of San Jose. My name is Jane Adams, and I am the Executive Director of the California Park and Recreation Society. So CPRS is bringing 1,100 guests to your city this week, as the City of San Jose Department of Parks, Recreation, and Neighborhood Services is hosting the 2003 California and Pacific Southwest Recreation and Park Training Conference. CPRS was founded in 1946, and we have been doing an annual conference every year since then. We have 3,200 members, and our members are statewide, and we are based in Sacramento. So I know many of you are familiar with the League of California Cities, and so CPRS is very similar in that we focus, however, specifically on park and recreation issues. So we bring park and recreation professionals together who are across disciplines and across agency boundaries. We want to advance professionalism, congeniality, career growth, and advocacy for parks and recreation. And Mayor, we don't take this conference just anywhere. We take it to very important cities, and San Jose is one of those. So we are delighted to be here. As the local host, the city staff has been instrumental in ensuring all the activities and programs are ready for our guest. The City of San Jose Department, they implemented a very democratic approach. So they contacted the other cities surrounding San Jose and asked if they would like to be involved in the planning of this event. They also gave priority to those agencies so that we can have as many different agencies involved by volunteering. So we rely heavily on volunteers to put this event on. And finally, we believe this really brings to forth the spirit of openness and collaboration that the city has within the San Francisco region. So it is my pleasure to present to the city a commendation of support for hosting our 2013 annual conference. And I certainly hope, well, I know I'll see you tomorrow, but I certainly hope the rest of the council members can attend this event. So, Mayor?
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I also have for you, Mayor, I also have your official conference shirt and your official badge, so you can get in. We want to be sure that you can get in. And then finally, for all the council members, I have another gift, which is a window decal for you to put on your car. And it's a static cling, so it's easy to take off and put back on again. But it is proclaiming that parks make life better. Thank you.
Well, thank you and congratulations. As usual, our PRNS staff is out doing great work in the community, and this is just one little example of that. Now I'd like to invite Councilmember Herrera and Vice Mayor Nguyen to join me at the podium to present a proclamation declaring the month of March as National Women's History Month in the city of San Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. We're happy to welcome and thank the representatives from the League of Women Voters, San Jose, Santa Clara, who've joined us today. Gloria Chunhu, President. Marie Arnold, Board Member, Chair of the Membership Committee, and also a member of the City Neighborhoods Commission. Rosaline Zisch, Youth and Education Coordinator. Paula Radzinski, Chair and Fall Fundraiser Coordinator. And Sharon Sweeney, Elections, Youth and Education Coordinator. It's an honor to have you join us in recognizing March 2013 as National Women's History Month. This was started back in 1981 by Congress. Women's History Month is an opportunity to recognize the accomplishments that women of every race, class, and ethnic background have contributed to the growth and strength of our city, county, and nation, and their countless recorded and unrecorded efforts to promote equality for women locally and nationally. This year's theme is Women Inspiring Innovation Through Imagination. It honors generations of women who throughout American history have used their intelligence, imagination, sense of wonder, and tenacity to make extraordinary contributions to the STEM fields. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. And Gloria, when she comes to speak, is going to mention a little about her involvement in that. Throughout history, women have played significant economic, cultural, and social roles in shaping our nation's drive to expand the right to vote, equal opportunity, and continue to lead social change movements such as the abolitionist movement, emancipation, labor, civil rights, and peace movements. Women have played contributions in everything from the military back to the Revolutionary War to present day science, medicine, law, every field. And recently, it was gratifying to hear President Obama mention Seneca Falls and the start of this women's rights movement back in the 1800s. It's definitely a subject that we need to hear more of and make sure that it is established in history so our children can learn about these contributions. Women's History Month is also an opportunity to unite, network, and mobilize as a community for meaningful change. And today, San Jose joins communities hosting thousands of events throughout the world to inspire women during Women's History Month. Whether it's Jennifer Siebel Newsom, who has done a film called Misrepresentation that talks about how women are treated in the media. She was actually here this week as part of CineQuest. And that's a film that we will be showing here at the City of San Jose. In fact, we just agreed to work with the League of Women Voters, and I will be working to put that on, so stay tuned for that. Or whether it's equal pay for equal work. We still don't have equal pay for women, 77 cents on the dollar, although there's a lot of efforts being made federally and in every which way to make sure we close that gap. We still have that work to be done. And in elected office, we talk about getting more women elected to office. Unfortunately, the U.S. in legislation in terms of our federal Congress still is 90th in the world, not a really impressive number as far as women elected to office. Nationally, 93% of the mayors of all the cities in this country are men. Locally, we have an all-male county board of supervisors. And so, you know, we work to make changes so that women are more represented. The League of Women Voters, San Jose, Santa Clara, is joining us today for their efforts to educate our community about the history and changing roles of women. Since 1920, the League has fought to improve our government and engage all cities in the decisions that impact their lives, citizens in the decisions that impact their lives. Operating at national, state, and local levels through more than 800 leagues, the League has chapters in all states, in addition to Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Hong Kong. And our local league, the San Jose Santa Clara chapter, was the first local chapter in the San Jose area, formed in 1945 until 1973, when two separate leagues were formed, Cupertino, Sunnyvale, and San Jose Santa Clara. The League of Women Voters formed from the movement that secured the right for women to vote, as the League's main effort still remains to expand participation and give a voice to all Americans. In fact, we just marked the 100th anniversary on March 3rd of the March on Washington, the Suffrage March on Washington, which is a really important event, and we're going to hear about that, too, in a couple of minutes. With that, I'm proud and honored to proclaim Women's History Month in San Jose, together with Mayor Reed, Vice Mayor Nguyen, and my council colleagues. And at this time, Mayor, would you please present the proclamation to Gloria Chen, who'll receive it on behalf of the League of Women Voters. You may clap.
Thank you. It's an honor for the League to be here to represent really the broader mission of this month, which is to recognize all the history of women throughout. I do want to say, after hearing about the California Parks Association coming here, that our local league here in San Jose is really proud because we will be hosting the statewide convention in May, bringing some 300 delegates, but people from throughout California in leadership roles from the League of Women Voters. But one thing I wanted to say is just it reminds me that, you know, it's only been 100 years, less than 100 years that women have had the vote nationally. But in California, 9 years before the 1920 amendment that allowed women to vote, we in California were among the first 6 states in the country to allow women to vote. And I was kind of pleased when I checked some history that the first Asian American ever to be registered to vote happened here in California in 1911. You know, that's not too long ago. There's so many things that we need to do. And this is about innovation. This is a celebration of innovation, particularly Women's History Month. I have 2 things I might comment on. As I worked at the Tech Museum, one of the things we most wanted to do was to get more women in science and technology. And I was really pleased in my small role there to work on the Tech Challenge, and we worked very hard so that now we've almost got a 40 to 50% participation rate from girls participating in the Tech Challenge, and that took an effort. The other thing that I think is that I'm proud on behalf of the League to mention is that the League does use innovation. We have perhaps one of the best, if not the best, website, and one of the earliest ones using new technology called smartvoter.org, where we're using the internet to provide information about elections and campaigns and measures and ballot measures and so forth to the public. It's so popular that it is not only throughout the state of California, but it's received many awards for its innovation in terms of being one of the very first sites to provide nonpartisan, fair position and education materials on elections to the whole state. And it is done by volunteers. Thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge one of my members, Sharon Sweeney, who also serves on the Santa Clara County Elections Commission. We all do work. And so thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Councilwoman Herrera, for acknowledging Women's History Month. Thank you.
All right, let's get one more picture. With Sharon.
Can they take one with my camera too? No, we don't have it. We're going to send it up to you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Councilmember Oliverio to join me at the podium as we present a proclamation declaring the month of March as multiple myeloma awareness month. Myeloma Awareness Month in the city of San Jose. We'll have some folks join us down here. Councilmember Oliverio will have the details.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Reed. We're taking this opportunity to bring awareness to a blood disorder that affects many, and we're going to have San Jose resident Jack Aiello give us more information about this disease and what's going on it. Jack?
My name is Jack Aiello, and I'm on behalf of the Bay Area Myeloma Support Group. I want to thank Mayor Reed and Councilman Oliverio and City Council members for making this declaration and bringing awareness to this incurable cancer. When I made this request of Councilman Oliverio, I was really impressed by his quick email response and office support, and I'm truly appreciative. I suspect most people here have never heard of a cancer called multiple myeloma. The first thing I have to say is it's not melanoma. It's a different cancer. I certainly hadn't heard of it when I was diagnosed. Rather, I was told that there was no cure for this cancer, and the average lifespan once diagnosed was 2 to 3 years. That was 18 years ago, so I've certainly been one of the fortunate ones. But at a time when you're diagnosed and you're told 2 to 3 years, in my case, think of your 16-year-old and 14-year-old daughters and 10-year-old son and wonder if you're going to see them graduate from high school and what's going to happen. Myeloma is a cancer of cells in the bone marrow. And it affects the immune system and can damage your bones and kidney function. It currently affects more than 100,000 people in the U.S. and has an estimated number of cases, new cases each year of 20,000 diagnoses in the U.S. So in a city like San Jose, that means there's probably 300 people with this disease. And this year, 50 more people will be diagnosed with the disease. The good news is that today there are more treatments available. The average lifespan is 6 to 7 years. However, there is still no cure. Despite all of these numbers and numbers of folks being diagnosed and such, even today the majority of patients have never heard of myeloma before their diagnosis. So to raise awareness, together with the International Myeloma Foundation, who first declared March as Myeloma Awareness Month in 2009, we, along with myself and other folks behind me who are either myeloma survivors or folks that have lost loved ones due to myeloma, are certainly appreciative of this proclamation. The IMF, the International Myeloma Foundation, is now celebrating its 22nd anniversary, and it's the oldest and largest myeloma organization dedicated to improving the quality of life of patients and their families. Thank you again to Councilman Oliverio and Mayor Reed for your help in fighting myeloma. I brought these friends with me in part to give buttons, myeloma awareness buttons, to all the council members. I hope you wear them proudly, and if there's anything that you learn of a new person in your area being diagnosed with myeloma, they're always welcome to contact us. We have a large Bay Area support group, and we can help. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll give you this. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. I'll get you back in the group, and let's take a photo. Squeeze it in a little bit so we can get it in one frame.
I'm the only one that can't squeeze here. Oh, yeah, hold it up. Oh, yeah, just fell out. Such a good plan. Slides right in.
Okay, there you go.
Try to hold it right side up.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Our next item is the consent calendar. We have some requests to speak on the consent calendar. Mr. Wall.
Final adoption of ordinances, I believe, was before. In any case, ordinance number 29217. This is an outgrowth of your relationship, the council's relationship with the municipal or metropolitan transportation committee. From that, we got a seat on the MTC, and Councilmember LICCARDO is our representative. From that interaction with Spur, Mr. Mayor, back last year, we didn't have Spur coming to San Jose and getting involved with the ability to assist with environmental or urban traffic ordinance construction. These ordinance 29217 and 29218 have very dramatic effects for neighborhoods, especially in the downtown. For one, farmers markets could show up at basically any park, for example, and that can be a good thing. However, if it's accompanied with amplified music and other distractions to break the peace, that can be a bad thing, in my opinion. The Downtown Business Association should pay very attention to this parking and loading zoning regulation aspect of this ordinance. Furthermore, the really vague and ambiguous use of the term economic development, land use, transportation policies, this is getting into an area where you're controlling how a city is being monitored. And when you combine with to reduce minimum required setbacks for commercial zoning districts, you're cutting away parking for these commercial areas, and you're forcing people either to end up in a 3-mile waiting line to get off of 880 onto Stevens Creek, for example. This will be happening throughout the city. Now, this is your decision-making. People elected you to do what you are doing. I just wanted to bring these items out to the public so they could see what it's all about. Thank you.
Any request to pull any item off of the consent calendar for further discussion? We have a motion to approve the consent calendar. On that motion, all in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Consent calendar is approved. Next item is 3.1, report of the city manager.
Mayor, I have no report today. Thank you.
We'll move to item 3.3, extension of business tax and business improvement district assessment amnesty programs and exemption of police officers engaged in secondary employment while in uniform from the city's business tax. We have a motion to approve. Mr. Wall, you want to speak on this?
Yes, I would. And I would also like to see a friendly amendment to this. I support this wholeheartedly, but I think it should be made permanent, that the police officers shouldn't have to worry about getting a business tax at all when they're performing duties for other entities. I think that what you've done as a council to the San Jose Police Department has been egregious and despicable, and I think that they should be able to be compensated in any way fashionable in perpetuity. We have so few police officers. What you should be talking about today is minimum staffing requirements and how many police officer beats are being not even filled or filled with very minimum number of police officers due to your conduct. So I would say you should vote for this, but amend it to make it permanent, not from a year for the dates that you have stated here in this ordinance. Furthermore, I think that you should go about in your own council districts and visit each fire department and thank them for their efforts as well, and to make sure that they can have overtime to augment what you've done to the fire department. Basically, you've undermined public safety as a council, and it's just not acceptable what you've done, in my opinion. You need to apologize and repent of your ways and start restoring services to the community before people start dying in greater numbers than they have already. Thank you.
Councilmember LICCARDO.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had one question. Julia or staff, anyone on the team could just respond. Did we have some knowledge in advance of these notices going out that we'd be including secondary officers or officers working on secondary employment and coaches, and that folks would kind of get caught up in this net that ended up obviously responding in a negative way?
Are you asking about our outreach efforts?
No, I'm just wondering, did we know before we sent the letters that we'd end up creating a...
Well, I mean, we don't know the nature. When we sent the letters out, it was through our relationship with the Franchise Tax Board, so that we didn't necessarily know the nature of the business or what type of business people were engaging in.
I see.
But the issue of police officers in secondary employment and sports officials have in the past been issues that we've struggled with in terms of how to either collect the tax or have them as part of a hardship exemption.
Okay.
And the Rules Committee is still looking at the other issue.
I understand they're grappling with how it is we draw the line. I understand that there may be challenging legal issues there, although obviously from the outside, we'd all hope we could just draw a line and preclude, us from taxing folks who are volunteering at Little League games. But I guess what I'm trying to understand, it sounds like you're saying we don't really know the occupation of anyone who might be the recipient of a letter. Is that right?
Correct. We don't know the nature of their business until they actually fill out a business tax application with us. And at that point, they tell us the type of business that they're in.
Okay. So in our database, at this point, if someone has filed for an exemption, we know.
Correct.
But if they haven't, we don't.
We don't. It's just a lead. It's like we have information that leads us to believe that they're engaging in business through that sharing of data with the Franchise Tax Board.
I see.
But we don't know the nature of that business or the amount of that business. We just know that they filed a Schedule C. So
Okay.
they could have earned $1,000 or they could have earned $100,000. We don't know.
So it sounds like you're saying there was really no way for us to avoid sort of this firestorm that we walked into.
Yeah, it's part of the challenges of implementing the code and ensuring that we get everybody who should be complying.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Councilmember Herrera.
Yeah, I just had another question on it. Absolutely supportive of this motion, but I was wondering on the previous memo from you, Julia, for the business tax amnesty program, are all of these things on that recommendation, are they getting implemented as well, including the...
No, the item that went to Rules Committee were just some options that we laid out, and we are still working internally to bring back a recommendation through Rules and then ultimately to the Council. So it looks like it'll be towards the end of March before we're able to get to the Rules Committee, which is why it's helpful to extend the amnesty program today, because that'll allow us the opportunity to implement any changes.
Great. So the $38, which we had discussed at Rules about, kind of having to pay $38 to get an exemption when that was the whole point. That's still looking at eliminating that.
Yeah, we're still looking at that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Constant.
Thanks. I just wanted to verify with the city attorney, item B that we're doing is a permanent change. It's not temporary. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Item A is the only one that has a limitation on time.
Okay. And then just for those who aren't aware, the Rules Committee gave quite a bit of question and answer and some direction, and not necessarily putting us in a position of where we have to choose which is a business that should be exempt versus which is not, and instead looked at how we define business as a number of gross receipts. I think it's going to be a much easier, streamlined way, and hopefully they'll be able to work out the details. When it comes back, it'll be very clear-cut for people.
And we've already, just so you know, we've already done some modifications on the forms already to make it easier.
I think that's it. Anything else from council members? I think not. We have a motion to approve the recommendations on the motion. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. So that's approved. Our next item is 3.4, Audit of the Office of Economic Development's Performance Measures. We have a presentation from our City Auditor, Sharon Erickson, to start.
Good afternoon. The City Manager's Office of Economic Development publicly reports a variety of performance data related to business development, regional workforce development, arts and cultural development, and its real estate services. This report is one in a series of departmental performance measure reviews by the Auditor's Office in conjunction with the City Manager's Budget Office and city departments to improve the quality of performance data. As part of this review, OED has already revised some of its performance measures, the labels, and the methodologies, and will be adding or deleting measures to improve its performance reporting. In our opinion, the revised performance measures generally meet the city's criteria of being meaningful, useful, and sustainable. We do recommend that OED develop additional performance measures for economic development incentives, particularly individual business incentive packages, and also develop a general business satisfaction survey, potentially through a San Jose-specific business survey. We further recommend OED assess by core service, like every other city department, how this performance measurement data can be used by management and staff to help analyze performance, establish performance objectives, and examine overall performance strategies. We want to thank the departments involved for their cooperation during this review. The administration has reviewed the information in this report and does agree with the recommendations. We're happy to answer. Kim Walsh and I are here, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Kim, anything you wanted to add before we get into questions?
No, just a thank you to Sharon and Avi and Min. OED's role has changed dramatically over the last 10 years. First, we took on the Work to Future Workforce Investment Board. Then we developed the city's first economic strategy. Then we took on cultural affairs. Then we took on real estate. Then the redevelopment agency went away, and we became the point for economic development citywide. So through that whole period, we accumulated a lot of measures and growing roles and responsibilities. So it was actually very constructive for us to step back with Sharon and her team and look at, of the things we do that we can actually measure quantitatively, what should those measures be? And it was a very constructive process, so just appreciation to them for the opportunity of being audited. Thanks, Sharon.
Well, if you're nice to her, she'll do it again someday.
Yeah, I'm sure she will.
Councilmember Constant.
Thank you. We had the pleasure of already hearing this at Public Safety Committee. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of points that I made there. First is kind of an editorial comment on page 8. We have 294 businesses that participate in the enterprise zone, foreign trade zone, and those have been in the crosshairs of our state legislature in the budget process. Just another attempt at the state to do things to fix their problems by compounding our issues at a local level. And I just want to remind all my colleagues that those nearly 300 businesses are important businesses in our city, and we need to make sure that we each individually and collectively keep the pressure on the state to not take away another economic development strategy. We know they've already stripped us of the redevelopment agency, and every year there's more things that come up, but this is the one that's in the crosshairs right now. On page 14, under the performance measures, one of the things we talked about, and I hope that we'll have some further discussion in the future, is how we can measure the success of the youth programs. We have a great way of keeping track of who goes through as adults and dislocated workers and youth, and we have a way to measure the further performance of the adults and the dislocated workers, what they get out of it, but we don't yet have one for youth. So we discussed that a little bit, and I know Kim and her staff are going to go look at ways that we can make sure that we're capturing whether we're, because it's a big difference if we're putting 100 youth through a program and 99 do a day, or putting 100 youth through a program and 99 complete it. So it's just something I think will help us in the future. And then finally, on page 17, number 9, there is a performance measure on tracking how many grants we give away, and I would like us to look at tying in not only the grants that we disperse, but the performance of the people who use those grants, what goals and objectives are met that are in the city's best interest, that are a result of those money, because it's great to give away money, and it's easy to increase the number of people you give away money to, but really measuring what we get as a city, what our community gets out of it, so that we know if that's a number we should be looking to increase over time, or quite frankly, a number we should decrease or eliminate over time, depending on the results. So with all those comments, I make a motion to accept the report.
All right, we have a motion to accept the report. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon, very much for another outstanding report. And then, of course, thank you to Kim Walsh and your team for doing a fabulous job. Obviously, you've taken on multiple tasks, like you just stated, but then this is the thinnest audit report that we received up to date, which is really good. And I asked these questions at the public safety meeting, but I wanted to give Kim an opportunity to share with the council what you've been doing in regards to seeking feedback from businesses and how they feel about what the office has done to provide different types of incentives to be helpful. This falls in line with recommendation number 2, and I just want to give you an opportunity to share with us what are some of the mechanisms that your office is doing right now as you move forward to actually create a more concrete survey to seek feedback from these companies.
Yes, thank you, Vice Mayor. We are every year in ongoing communication with well over 250 businesses that we target to have meaningful outreach to. And I would say in the sort of first year and a half of us being the sole entity doing business outreach, we've really focused on capturing the stories and capturing the testimonials of happy customers. Whether we help them through the permit process, we help them secure a federal grant, we help them hire 50 workers. We've been capturing those testimonials because they've been very valuable for the mayor and you all and us to go out and promote San Jose and show that we're able to work at the speed of business and that our staff is adding value. What we'd like to do next is to do a survey of the companies that we have interacted with in the last year and ask them the specific ways that we help them, and do that in a survey form, starting with the ones that we have definitely met with and interacted with in the last year.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Herrera.
Thank you, and thank you, Sharon, for the report, and Kim for all the wonderful work your department does. I was wondering if you could, one of the things that I noticed was just, and I just wanted you to mention how many staff people you do have in economic development. I think that you have a lot of demands, a lot of different areas you cover with a relatively small staff. So I just wanted to have you mention that.
Yes, and actually we do have a very small staff, and you can see the breakdown on page 3. So the Office of Economic Development, the core group that really does the on-the-street interacting with business is about 13 FTEs, including the admin and support people that support us.
And obviously the number of business you contact is a very small portion of the businesses that exist in San Jose, but how do you determine those businesses? Which ones are you focused on? And how could we work to contact a larger selection of businesses given our small staffing? Do you have any ideas of how we can scale the ability to reach out to some of those other businesses?
Yes, certainly. So we react to leads that come in, and leads from you and leads from the network are really, really important. And then we proactively target large companies that are important for revenue generation or employment, those scaling companies that are growing, and then companies that have newly landed here, like, for example, foreign investment coming in. The way to scale our impact is, first of all, through partnerships, through the kinds of partnerships like we have with the Downtown Association and the small business chambers and neighborhood business districts, because they're a key way to get information out, deliver assistance, and get leads in. But then ultimately, I think the city needs to look at scaling up the staff that it has in economic development. I mean, it's my job to believe this, but I really believe this. If you have more staff out there interacting with business, you'll have more jobs, you'll have more revenue, you'll have more investment. So when the time is right, you'll want to rebuild the economic development function in a way that makes sense for the city where it's going.
And what about, I know other cities have economic development organizations with where there's a large private-public partnership in terms of economic development. Just share your thoughts on that briefly.
Well, I think every city is different in terms of the constellation of organizations that are involved in economic development. Some cities have large chambers or regional economic development organizations who are really drivers of economic development in terms of promoting the region, supporting expansion of business, and attracting new businesses in. We have a mix of organizations that do that, and I know in the future I do think there's opportunity, for example, for our San Jose Silicon Valley Chamber of Commerce. They're very interested in evolving to be a stronger economic development partner for the city. That could really help expand our capabilities.
Great. And I wanted to reiterate what the Vice Mayor just said. Not a whole lot of heavyweight kind of things, or we have to come in here and really have a huge discussion on making major changes in economic development. I think fine-tuning the reporting so that we can understand what we're looking at and giving the department a better sense of what they're accomplishing is great. But a great report, and thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember LICCARDO.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Sharon, for the report, and Kim for your great work. And I appreciated the discussion around incentives. I know those always attract a lot of public attention, and for good reason, and I think we do need to be rigorous in understanding what foregone revenues there might be and what benefits there might be, whether those exceed the foregone revenues. And I appreciate, I think everybody is very serious about really lifting the veil in a way that is clear to everyone, particularly members of the public, about how we're using public dollars and incentives. I had a quick question about, two questions, I'm sorry. One is on page 9. As you look at the chart, which is Exhibit B, and revenue generation, and number 3 at the top of that relates to business revenue from attracted or expanding businesses, which previously received assistance from the city. And I see there are really two categories there. There are taxes from new companies and taxes from retained companies. And that seems to be what we're measuring, except, and this may just be a semantics issue, and so hopefully you guys can straighten me out on this. You know, Kim, I hear you often cite the statistic that looking regionally at where growth is in jobs, that 95% of it is not from new companies, but in fact from expanding companies. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that's really our primary economic development goal, is to expand employers who are here and help them keep hiring here. Which of those two measures captures expanding companies, the new or the retained?
I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the retained. But I want to emphasize that the new companies are probably new to San Jose, but they may be in the broader Silicon Valley or Bay Area, but have just found their way to San Jose as the appropriate location.
So Oracle would be a new company.
Would be new to San Jose,
right.
So we would count that under A, taxes from new companies. So say Oracle, moving into our downtown, if there's a tax implication for that,
right.
That would be considered a new company.
But then when PwC expands,
that would be considered a retained company because they're already in San Jose and they've expanded.
But then whether they expand or not, they'd be retained, right? In other words, let's say a company was just thinking of moving and they're not going to hire any more employees, but they're thinking of moving, and we reach out to them and we persuade them to stay put or to move to a different building in the same city. Would that be retained?
Council members, Mindan Wong, City Auditor's Office. If there was a company that was already in San Jose and that company is thinking about leaving, and OED worked with that company to keep it here, we would be counting those under retained jobs.
Right. So I guess, here's what I'm saying. I guess the numbers that are there don't seem intuitively right with what we understand, right? Because we'd expect whatever category that would capture expanded companies would greatly outstrip new companies.
Yeah, and I think it's going to vary from year to year, first of all. So this is just a point in time. And the other point I want to make is this is really hard to measure. And I want to point out what this is not measuring in the note above is it's not measuring property tax from companies, and it's not measuring utility tax, because that is more difficult and way more expensive to measure. So it's really underestimating the revenue involved, and that fact, it might be slightly skewing the distribution in this particular year of what you might expect from retained versus new. We'd have to look at the projects that are underlying that year, I think, to answer your question more.
So we're really measuring sales, TOT, and business license fees.
It's really just sales and the business tax. And that's not very satisfying, but that's what's easy to measure. So there's always limitations. Right. That's why.
I assume TOT would be in there as well, right?
It's actually not.
It's not. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. I understand it takes a lot of work and a lot of resources to sometimes just get the measurements. I guess along those same lines, then, a question about item number 11 in that chart, which is on the next page. The gains and losses in the San Jose metro area, and I know that there's, we commonly see the metro area data reported, and I know that's what EDD gives us. Is there any likelihood any time in the near future that we'll actually get a San Jose city limit number?
Yes, that is a good question. And we have a special relationship with EDD where we can do runs for the city of San Jose. So there's no reason why on an annual basis we could do both. We could show the gains in the San Jose metro area and then our own city of San Jose gains and make sure we're at least tracking the growth in the region.
Okay, is that something we routinely do on an annual basis, or?
We do on an as-needed basis, like when it's time to do a report to council,
Right.
There's some opportunity. It's fairly involved, but it's something we are very unique as a city that we have passed all the security procedures to be able to get that data, which is otherwise very confidential.
Okay, thank you. The last question just relates to Exhibit 5 on page 14. When we look at the clients who are placing jobs through Work to Future, which is a great program, I'm glad we got it, and I know it's really threatened with a lot of cuts in federal money right now, so I hope we're able to keep it going. But I know there was a significant change in numbers when we posted originally relative to federal mandate goals versus numbers that were, I think, more absolute. And I guess the most interesting number to me would be neither, which would be, does the federal government help us understand how their mandated goals relate to what the rate of reemployment would be without assistance? In other words, if we were just trying to measure, are we making a difference in our ability? And I see Jeff shaking his head, so I'm guessing the answer is no. Is it? I'm sorry, come on down, Jeff.
Yeah. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure.
Please, you're saying...
If what we're trying to understand is, are we making a difference? In other words, is someone who's seeking to get necessary skills to get reemployed, if they're doing better in our program than they would otherwise be doing without help, how do we measure that? And, does the federal mandated goal somehow reflect what we would think empirically would happen with or without assistance?
Right, so the goals themselves are outlined in the workforce legislation, but the actual numerical targets associated with those goals are defined by the state of California. And the way they reach those numerical targets, they really do go jurisdiction by jurisdiction, so it's not a common set of goals for all workforce investment boards across the state. Each workforce investment board will have different goals depending on whether it's for your adult, your dislocated worker, or youth. And basically that's based on the level of distress, not based on value add or performance, to answer your question.
So they look at the unemployment rate. Is that,
the unemployment rate, yeah. The number of people, the number of people that are have been long-term, medium-term, short-term unemployed. It really varies by each one of those variables. There's a very complex formula behind each one of that. So with our own board of directors, the majority of whom are private sector, they ask that same kind of public policy question as well. And so really what we try and do are have proxies. So we have a pretty extensive continuous quality improvement initiative. We're constantly asking our customers that kind of question. Did we make a difference? Would you recommend us to a family member or friend? Where can we improve our services, et cetera? So we really try and use that data to make a difference. The other thing, which is more of an input measure and not an output measure, is the number of services that our clients use on average. And that hovers around 8 to 10, which can include anything from meeting with a case manager to going to workshop or us sending them to training. So the level of usage can be one indicator, but it also could be an indicator of the number of barriers that individual has to deal with in order to gain employment.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Jeff. Thanks.
I just wanted to take a minute to comment on some of the successes by our Office of Economic Development that are, if you read through the data in the audit, it may not be as apparent sometimes as we've achieved, and we have had some great successes in this office, even though it's a very small office. When you think about the loss of the redevelopment agency and all the economic development staff and the work that's been taken on by this office, it's a lot. So we're doing our business and outreach and retention efforts, facilitating corporate expansions, relocations, generating general fund revenues through sale of properties, taking on special projects like the air service strategy, earthquake stadium, small business web portal, patent office efforts. Oh, we're also facilitating arts and culture as we go along with a small staff. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the office is much bigger than economic development in what most people think of as in the traditional sense, because it's got OCA and Work to Future and other things in there. So that does take away from the management of the office, because Kim has to do more than just economic development. So it's important to keep that in mind. But one thing as we go into the budget, I want to make sure that we maintain the appropriate staffing levels consistent with the highest priorities which the council has set. And as we look at the budget process and the staffing in the department, I want to make sure that we don't lose track of the most important things we do, because there's lots and lots of other things that we have to do. And as you can see, the staff is spread out in a lot of different directions. So we'll have to take a look at that in the budget process. But I also wanted to point out that the Center for Continuing Study of the California Economy today released some data regarding gross domestic product growth in 2011. So this is looking back with high quality data. The United States of America increased its GDP by 1.8% in 2011, which was better than being in recession. California was at 2.0% increase. The Bay Area was at 4.1% increase, and the San Jose metropolitan area was at 7.7% increase. So that's very good. San Francisco, Oakland was only 2.6%. And even though we tend to track the jobs in San Jose, we have workers in San Jose too. And let's not forget that it is our workforce that works throughout Silicon Valley that generates that increase in gross domestic product. And that's an important factor in keeping that workforce healthy and employed is a full-time job for many of us. But we can certainly be proud of the work that we've done with a relatively small staff. We can't take all the credit for the metropolitan area because we share it with more than a dozen other cities. But the jobs that are created regionally that our people work in, as well as the jobs that are created in San Jose, all add to that. And I think it's important that we track this because it's such a high priority to us. Even taking a purely selfish view of what's in it for us, there's a lot of revenues, and we all want more sales tax revenues, more property tax revenues, because we need to deliver services, and this is an important way to get there, which is why the council has made it such a high priority. One thing on the performance measures, we have the performance measures listed in the exhibits, and I guess I have a question about the presentation in the budget document when we're doing performance measures and whether or not it'll be for more than 1 year at a time. A lot of our performance measures in the budget documents are over multiple years, so we can track them across time. So is it safe to assume these would be presented in the same way when we get the data?
There are some of these measures that, as I understand it, will be presented over time, especially some of the larger economic measures. So things like unemployment rates are generally tracked over long periods of time. The budget document typically includes a much shorter time frame, but part of this project is to make sure that the budget document, the auditor's annual service efforts and accomplishments report are all lined up. The idea being that the service efforts and accomplishments report includes the prior 5 years. When you put it together with the budget document, then you have the prior year and the go-forward year. So when you put those two together, you can end up with a long-term picture.
Okay, good. I think that's important. I have some requests to speak on this item. We'll take that now. David Wall, and then Mr. Piazza.
I'd like to read into the record, page 11, recommendation number 1, quote, to assess the scope, efficacy, and outcomes of the city's incentives. Therefore, council-approved agreements and policy incentives such as construction tax and traffic impact fee reductions, the Office of Economic Development should develop and consistently calculate the realized results and incorporate that analysis into its performance measures, period, close quotes. In other words, that's what you've been talking about today, is all this illusory business when you're waiving all these construction taxes, traffic mitigation fees that we'll end up talking later today on street pavement, and a whole host of other taxes and other revenues as a gamble, if you will, that the estimates will prove true. Now, there's good reason to think that they will, but money is money, and if you're throwing it away when you're not actively protecting public safety and other sectors of the city for businesses, well, that's a problem. Now, when I hear that the OED only has 13 people, that's kind of a misrepresentation, because they really control almost every sector of the city with reference to economic development. Chief amongst them, and should be thanked today, and I'm going to thank the Director of Planning, Building, Code Enforcement. Without PBCE or the Director of Public Works, none of these projects would go forward. And so you should make sure that they're thanked, because OED's impact to their overall organizational structure and duties are materially affected. Lastly, I would like to thank the auditor, and once again, you're all thanking the auditor, but cash talks, and we know what material from a rear end of a bull walks. So give her and the auditors a merit increase. Thank you.
Jim Piazzo.
You know, every time the last 5 years I've been patiently waiting around and stuff, but I never hear anybody from the economic department saying about small businesses. You know, the backbone of America is about small businesses, and yet we all just look the other way and stuff. But again, I repeat this time and time again, when do the small businesses get looked at? When do we really get our fair share? Because I know all these other big guys and these big companies and stuff, they get all the perks and everything and stuff, but you guys are really, you know, you guys are taking a seat on everything, because you're really missing the point of it, because we should be all on the same set of rules, not where one has everything and one doesn't have nothing. Again, shouldn't we go with everybody in the same direction? Instead, I see everybody just going scattering. Again, when do we say we've had enough, and when do we put America back to work? I'm not saying you guys haven't put America back to work, but again, we haven't tended to small businesses. We all know this up here again. So I'm going to ask you again, one more time, please help the small businesses of America.
That concludes the public comment. We have a motion to approve the recommendation to accept the audit of the report. On that motion, all in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Motion carries. Report's approved. Thank you very much. We'll now take up item 6.1, pavement maintenance funding strategy. I'm sorry, we'd noticed that to be last, I think, folks. Sorry, a little ahead of 2 more items before we get to last. Item 7.1, agreement with HK Enterprises for temporary staffing at the water pollution control plant. Motion is to approve. I have a request to speak. Mr. Wall.
Sir, there's a memorandum in front of you. I did not like writing it one single bit. You're a good, decent man, sir, but I'm asking that you resign as the chairman of the Treatment Plant Advisory Committee. I am basically sick and tired of what is going on at the water pollution control plant and also within the office of the city manager, because this business with the capital improvement program budget sitting on all those, $175 million of ratepayer monies. And sir, the mayor of Saratoga basically upstaged everybody at the last TPAC meeting, because the tributary agencies of West Valley can't calculate the rates for their own ratepayers because of this horrible catastrophe that's going on at the Environmental Services Department with reference to all that money. Now, also in that issue is how much of that ratepayer money has to be refunded because it isn't being used. There is something that the auditor should pay attention to, is an accounting trick where you could refund projects when you've actually done nothing at all to the project. So that issue has to be looked at. I contend that the plant now, in its history, at any point in time now, can fail. It can fail in 2 ways. One, it can fail with the process, or it can fail with a lack of power, and there'll be a raw sewage spill. I have basically no rhetorical mercy for any of you that sit on this council for your dealing with the water pollution control plant, especially for all you council members that have been in your 2nd term or even promoted to the rank of mayor. And sir, I did not like to write this memo, but I am compelled by my many years of going to the Treatment Plant Advisory Committee and my intimate knowledge of water pollution control to speak out in this manner. And I speak with authority in this matter because there's not one amongst you who sits before me or off to my left that has the hours that I've spent on that issue. Thank you.
That concludes public testimony. Councilmember KALRA.
Thank you, Mayor. And so I see the, in addition to the extension of the 1.2 million from March of this year to March of 2014, that there's an option to exercise 4 additional one-year options to extend the term of the agreement through March 1st, 2018. And I was wondering what the plan is to avoid that from happening. I think that when this first came up, I was disturbed and voted against it because we were actually paying more for the temporary staffing than we do for our own city employees, and yet the workers that are doing the work are getting paid a lot less than our city employees, and the actual company, the private company, is getting well over 200% profit they're taking from the taxpayers to perform a function that's being performed by city employees. And I'd much rather have that extra money go to us paying more to retain our employees or attract more employees that we know are getting compensated fairly, rather than profit going to the pockets of a private entity at taxpayer expense.
Carrie Romanow, Environmental Services Director. So our plan is to use these temporary staff as a bridge. We're working on a couple options to address the compensation issues out at the plant for those key categories, and our preference would as well be to have changes to those compensation for those particular classes, and we're working on that, and we're not looking to have this be an extensive use of temporary staff, but it is a tool I think that we need at this time.
Okay, and I appreciate your diligence and your sincerity. I don't agree with the suggestions, especially a suggestion to have 4 extensions to 2018, but thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, the extensions are just in case we need it. My hope is we don't.
I understand. I think that, unfortunately, I think unless there's a concerted effort from City Hall to really put more on the compensation side than has been to retain employees and more importantly, to attract them rather than just going the outsourcing route, my fear is that by already agreeing to the recommendation to have the one-year options, it gives an easy out for us to just simply go along with that rather than giving us a hard one-year time to figure out what we can do to avoid having to contract out to a private company that pays lower wages to their employees and charges us more than we pay our own employees.
Councilor Campos.
Thank you, Mayor. Carrie, I'm trying to understand at the bottom of page 2, your report states that the hours are based upon the 1792 hours of work per year, with 288 being subtracted from a normal 2080 that would happen during the year. Does that, just so that I'm trying to understand this correctly, is that to mean that temporary workers are not eligible for sick time or time off, paid time off in the form of holidays or vacation?
My understanding is that is because the city would not be paying that rate while they're on sick or vacation time. So HKA may offer them those benefits, but the city wouldn't be charged for those. Those benefits in terms of time off are bundled into the rate that we pay.
So then we're paying then equivalent to the 1792. Is that what?
Yes. So that would be the maximum they would work for us. So it lets us compare apples to apples. Mm-hmm. So when we look at a city employee, they're paid 2,080 hours in a year, and then a vendor working the same amount of equivalent work days would be paid 1,792, because we assume our staff take vacation and have sick time.
And that's all factored into a 2080 year, right?
Yes, it just lets us compare them side by side.
Okay, so do we know if this company offers sick time and vacation? And
I don't know that. I'm going to ask if Nina knows that. We'll get back to you on that. I don't know the answer to that. I know that they need to pay prevailing wage. I'm not sure if the benefits have to exactly match ours.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rocha.
Thank you, Mayor. And I did actually ask this question offline. It's not really for you, it's more for the city manager's office. And Councilmember Campos kind of raised the issue now that he has. That's why I was asking offline to not have this debate or discussion here, but it was the amendment to the living wage. So in any new contracts we enter, that there is some assurances that employees are provided time off for whether it's bereavement, illness, family emergency, whatever the case may be. I believe the status was supposed to be March, and again, I'm just going off memory.
Right. Thank you, Councilmember Ed Chicago, Assistant City Manager. In the intervening few moments since you asked me that question offline, I did get a response from Public Works. So they confirmed that they are still working on bringing back the contract amendments related to benefits for workers. And again, there was specifically related to the living wage policy. That work apparently had been impacted somewhat by the ramp up on the minimum wage citywide that staff is currently working on, but it is on the plate and working to get that in place before the end of the fiscal year.
And would that apply here in a contract such as this one?
It would not, because prevailing wage typically does not have the same provisions as living wage. To Carrie's point, I'm not exactly familiar with how the mechanics of that work.
It was more of the service contracts, or I can't remember what the definition is for.
Well, prevailing wage would establish specific rates for individual classifications of workers, as opposed to living wage basically setting a floor for all workers.
That was it. Thank you.
I have a question regarding the chart on page 3 that shows the city employees' annual cost and the temporary staffing annual cost, and whether or not that city employees' annual cost is going up. I'm assuming that these are existing numbers, and we will look at the forecast. We know that both healthcare costs and pension costs are going up next year. So I think this differential here is going to close down a bit as costs continue to rise. So is that the right assumption about this chart?
Well, of course, I'm optimistic, and I'd like to believe the costs will go down, but they probably will go up.
Okay. That's one of the questions about the contract. So we have a year at this temporary staffing annual cost. How do we handle cost increases on the private sector side under this contract? We just don't renew the contract if they go up too much?
There's set escalators in there, but they're tied to what our costs are, because the prevailing wage is set as noted. So if they wanted an increase, that would be something we'd need to negotiate.
Okay. But our city employees' annual cost, if we increase their pay, or if pension costs go up or healthcare costs go up, would close that gap between our cost and the temporary staffing cost. That's just the current gap.
Yes, and assuming there's no changes to prevailing wage.
Right. Okay. I have a couple of requests. Nope, I'm sorry, not on this one. We had all the public testimony on this. I don't know if we had a motion. We do have a motion? We have a motion. Clerk, does the clerk say we have a motion? Clerk says we have a motion. Okay. We've already taken a public testimony on this matter. You can speak under open forum when we'll be there pretty soon. On the motion, all in favor? Opposed? 1, 2, 3 opposed. KALRA, Campos, and Chu opposed. Motion carries.
Mayor, I'd like to record an aye vote.
I'm sorry, Councilmember LICCARDO?
I want to record an aye vote.
Yes, for Councilmember LICCARDO. You got the 3 no votes. All right, that takes care of item 7.1. Item 7.2 is next. Proposition 84, Stormwater Grant Program Funding for Stormwater Green Streets Projects. We have a motion to approve. A couple of requests to speak on that one. Mr. Wall.
I would like to thank the city for moving forward on this project. The only comment that I have is, why did these residents have to suffer for so long? And I think that's the inexcusable part of this. Other than that, thank you for finally resolving this terrible problem.
Gay Gale, and then Aurelia Sanchez and Tony May.
Mayor, members of council. Last time we were here in front of you, it was in budget session in June, and we were begging for help to get rid of Lake LICCARDO, if you remember the picture I put out there. With the drought, we haven't had a Lake LICCARDO yet this season, but we thank you and urge you very strongly to vote for this motion. It not only brings extra funding to the city, it puts $60,000 back in reserve, and it gets project $2.5 million funded that we didn't think would be in for another 5 years. The reason that is because our departments of environmental services and transportation worked hard to find this grant funding, and we thank them. We as neighbors, I'm speaking as a neighbor, thank them very much for their efforts here. I've moved 34 times, and most of the places I lived had a lot of alleys. They were the rule rather than an exception. In San Jose, alleys are the exception. So it's great that you can look at a very small neighborhood, Spartan Keys, a very small number of impacted streets, and find the wherewithal, staff time, and energy, and your vote to make this possible. Thank you very much.
Aurelia Sanchez.
Hello. As a resident of Spartan Keys, I would first like to thank my council member, Sam LICCARDO, and the city council and all the staff that worked on the grant. This is a win for the neighborhood, and it's also a win for the city. I'd like to remind the city council that each neighborhood is a gateway to downtown, and when we make improvements in the alleyways or any other infrastructure, it's a win-win for everybody. Again, thank you.
Tony May.
I would just like to also thank particularly Councilman LICCARDO and all the people that have worked on this so hard. And we are praying for a couple more Lake LICCARDOs yet this rain season, but starting in October, everything's going to change, and we're very grateful for that. Thanks.
That concludes public testimony. Councilmember LICCARDO.
Thank you, Mayor. I know a lot of politicians dream that their names will be attached to parks. Apparently, I've got my own lake. I just wanted to thank members of the community, particularly Carlos Alvarez and Tony May, who I know have been pushing very hard, and appropriately so, because we know for many, many years this has been a problem for residents who live along these alleys. I also wanted to especially thank Hans Larson, who came out in the community and actually spoke and answered questions, tough questions, when we all met out at the Washington Center. Oh, that was probably a year and a half ago. And ultimately came up with I thought, a pretty incredible solution. Obviously, relying on other people's money since we don't have much ourselves, which I'm really grateful for. And I know the environmental services team, I'm sure, was instrumental in securing that grant as well. So I just want to thank our leadership and our departments, Hans and Carrie, for their hard work. And I believe the motion's already been made. So thank you.
Yes, we do have a motion on that motion. All in favor? Opposed? We have none opposed. Motion carries. That's approved. Our next and last item is 6.1 Pavement Maintenance Funding Strategy. We'll take a minute for our staff to get in place. I think Hans Larson is going to lead the presentation. I think Ed Chicada is going to open it up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, Ed Chicada, Assistant City Manager, as our staff gets settled in. Let me just perhaps intro the topic. As the council, I'm sure, recalls, the City Council has discussed many times the ongoing issue and somewhat pervasive issue of pavement maintenance and funding for the significant need. As we've had discussions in other contexts, the next local opportunity for a revenue measure being next year, 2014, this is a good time for staff to present the current status of our transportation assets and needs. From a citywide context, perhaps just to give a perspective there, recognizing that the pavement needs are among many issues requiring funding throughout the city. The council will be considering over the course of the next year a number of these various needs. So as such, staff really sees this as an opportunity to further the discussion and identify issues that should be considered within the context of transportation needs and the additional work that might be needed in order to bring forward more specific proposals. Staff would suggest that the council keep a maximum number of options on the table so that, in particular, if there are any variations on the themes, that the council would like staff to evaluate further in consultation with other stakeholders, that work can be completed over the course of the next several months. With that, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Ed. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we're pleased to provide you with this opportunity to review and discuss a pavement maintenance funding strategy for the city. I'm Hans Larson, the Director of Transportation, and joining me here at the table is Betsy Shotwell, Director of Intergovernmental Relations, and to my right is Kevin O'Connor, Deputy Director for Transportation Infrastructure Maintenance. You have a staff report and our recommendations that have been forwarded to you from the Transportation and Environment Committee from their meeting of February 4th. And I'm professionally heartened to see that several council members have generated several memos on the topic, and look forward to a robust discussion on this issue. In terms of background, I have a few slides we wanted to share with you, and then look forward to working with you on discussing this topic. And our first slide, there we go. As the council is aware, the conditions of San Jose's pavement and all 2,400 miles of our street is deteriorating, and it's primarily an issue of age. Most of the streets in San Jose were largely built between the 1950s, 1980s, and are 30 plus years old. And we're at a point in the life of our streets where we need a much more significant level of maintenance to keep our streets in good condition. I'd like to acknowledge that the council has had a lot of discussion on this topic over the past years. In October 2010, there was a full half-day study session on this topic, and then afterwards, each year, we've reported back to the Transportation and Environment Committee with updates in terms of the condition of our street system, as well as options on how we can address really a need for increased investment. It was interesting at the December T&E meeting, we had our annual report, and really the sense of the committee really is sort of tired of talking about this issue and looking at options, and really asked staff to come back in 2 months, which was February, with a firm game plan, an action plan on how we can solve the issue of funding needs for pavement maintenance. And it is a very significant issue. We've identified that we need about $100 million a year on average to address keeping our streets in good condition, and we're at a point where we only have about $20 million a year. So we're only 20% funded based on our needs. I'd like to add, too, that last year Council took a couple of significant actions. Last year, Council adopted a priority street network, which was focused on using the available monies that we have in the most efficient way possible. And so we identified approximately a 400-mile system of streets, 400 out of 2,400, that were most important, and that we would apply the available money towards those streets, which are most heavily used, so that we could provide the best good to the community with available resources. Also, last year, Council took a significant action in increasing local investment for pavement maintenance from what was previously $1 million a year, and tripled it to $3 million a year. I wanted to talk also about the efforts that the Department of Transportation makes on an ongoing basis to make sure that we use our funds in the most effective way possible. We have a computerized pavement management program that allows us to manage the entire network and keep tabs in terms of the overall condition. And this program allows us to make decisions on any monies that we have, where would be the most effective place to apply those funds, so that we're streets that are due for pavement maintenance treatment. We capture them before they deteriorate to a point where the cost would be much more significant. Another efficiency measure that we take is looking at how we deliver pavement maintenance. And so we have a hybrid service model in which we, for the vast majority of work, we use low bid contractors that are qualified to do pavement maintenance work. And so most of the work is done, is contracted out. However, we do have a small team of staff that addresses pothole repairs, and we find that it's most efficient for our staff to be able to address potholes in the most timely manner. We have a service model of addressing safety-related potholes within 48 hours. Another efficiency measure is using innovative methods for pavement maintenance. And 2 years ago, we were one of the first cities in the Bay Area to use a recycled in place resurfacing process. We modeled that on the Monterey Highway, a road corridor, and we found that we saved 20% in the cost by using that technique. Last year, we added a number of other streets, such as Santa Teresa Boulevard and Ocala, in using that method, again, to use our limited dollars in the most efficient way possible. Want to also mention, as I've been fond of saying, there's really 4 strategies to deal with increasing transportation investment, and this is something that we continue to advocate for. So the 4 strategies are more federal money, more state money, more regional money, more local money, and we continue to pursue that, but I think that we're recognizing that we're at a point right now that it's very difficult to get any significant funds at the federal and the state level. They have their challenges, and for the dollars that they do make available, it's increasingly difficult to get them for local pavement maintenance needs, as there are major issues on interstate highways and the major state transportation facilities. We're also facing an issue of a declining level of revenue coming from the gas tax. Most of the money that we get for pavement maintenance comes from state and federal sources that are related to the gas tax. This is a source of revenue, particularly at the federal level, that has not increased in value in the last 20 years, and so we're able to do less with those dollars. But we also are looking at increasing fuel efficiency, and so as a result of those policies and that movement, gas tax revenues are essentially a declining source of revenue. So at the state and federal level, that's a big challenge that they have in just replacing that traditional funding source. In terms of kind of the conclusions, we are at a crossroads here where there's really a choice. We can either let our streets continue to decline, which I don't think any of us want to see, or we can increase investment. And really our recommendations that we have are really about what are our best strategies on increasing investment. I believe that we need to take matter in our own hands and look at local actions, and that means actions that we take as a city or with our local partners like VTA and looking at their regional sources. If we're going to be looking at increased taxes or revenue, that does involve educating our community, providing them with information on the topic so that they can weigh in, and staff is prepared based on the direction from council to begin doing the work to educate our local community. I just want to share with you 4 other slides that provide us a little bit of context here. This is one we've showed before in terms of the path that we're on, and it's one that creates a level of urgency in that it only is going to be more expensive the longer we wait to try to solve this issue. So you can see the last sort of 3 years on how the backlog of deferred maintenance has increased over time. It's about $40 million a year that the backlog grows. About 3% more of our streets slip into poor condition and become much more expensive to take care of. At current funding levels, if we do nothing, we're looking at a backlog growing to about $870 million by the year 2020, with over 50% of our streets in poor condition. I've been asked, what would it take to flatten the curve? And essentially, it would, if we could increase investment from the $20 million we have now to $54 million, adding $34 million, that would essentially flatten the curve, allow us to take care of the streets that are in good or fair condition, and then that would leave us with, having to deal with the poor streets, being able to resurface or do major reconstruct or do major rehabilitation on those. So at $34 million, we could flatten the curve. This next slide is our pavement maintenance pyramid or triangle, which is a tool that we've found effective to kind of explain the different categories of funding needs that we have and how we allocate our funds. So at the top is the work that we do to manage the system and repair potholes on a as-needed basis, and so that's fully funded at $4 million a year. The balance of our $20 million is going towards the priority street network, which you can see in the middle band there in green. The priority street network is not all of our major streets. It's only about half of our major streets. And so the other major streets, in order to fully fund those, would cost about $16 million annually to have all of our streets in good condition. And it's noted that 87% of the traffic in San Jose travels on the major streets. And so while it's only a third of our street network, it carries 87% of the traffic. And so that red box there we consider strategically one of the most important to be able to fill. The bottom of the triangle represents our local streets, the streets in our neighborhoods. That's about 2/3 of our overall street inventory, and there's really two key categories there. The orange represents the streets that are in good or fair condition that need preventative maintenance treatments, sealing, in order to keep them in good shape. That would cost about $18 million a year to address that. The yellow box are our local neighborhood streets that are already in poor condition, and this represents the greatest need that we have is really a one-time investment of about $300 million to bring those streets back up to a good condition. And if that were to occur, it would cost us about $6 million annually to be able to maintain that. If you add all of the numbers here, we have, again, about $20 million a year. If we increased it to $54 to $60 million a year, we could take care of all of our streets that are in good condition and maintain them from a long-term basis. And so we talk about $100 million of needs. It's really two things. It's about $60 million ongoing money, and then it's $40 million a year for 7 or 8 years out to 2020 to take care of the streets in poor condition and bring them back into good shape. So the last slide I have is the recommended strategy that we had in the Transportation and Environment Committee report, and there's 3 items here, and they're looking at more locally oriented solutions to raise revenue. The first one is to work with the VTA to modify their current countywide transportation sales tax program. And I call this the extend and amend concept. There are 19 urban counties in California, and we are the only one of the 19 that doesn't provide monies to cities for local pavement maintenance. And part of the reason is in 2000 when the VTA pursued their current half-cent sales tax, they only had the legislative authority to tax for transit projects. So we have a 100% transit program. VTA has since gotten the authority to also be a taxing agency for regional highways and funds for local pavement maintenance. So they have the ability to go back and modify their program to be consistent with what's typical practice across the state. And I think there's certainly a transit nexus with the program. A lot of the VTA buses run on San Jose streets. They have an interest in our streets being in good condition for their patrons that use bus transit. We estimate that we could probably get $15 to $20 million out of this effort if we were to pursue something that's typical of what's being done in other urban counties across California. Our second recommendation is looking at going to the voters with a new general sales tax measure. And this would likely be something that combines a variety of city needs, public safety, we can include pavement maintenance as part of that. It's a general tax increase, has the benefit of only requiring a simple majority. And through that program, if we could generate something in the order of $20 million for pavement maintenance, that would go a long ways towards addressing our needs. The third recommendation is looking at a bond program that could take care of streets that are in poor condition. Bond funds can't be used for basic ongoing maintenance, so it has to be for a more significant infrastructure investment, such as street reconstruction. And this would be a way in which we could deal with a backlog of about $300 million of streets that are in poor condition. That measure would require two-thirds voter approval. Our last item is recognizing the challenge in getting two-thirds approval is supporting efforts which have already been initiated with the state legislature in reducing the threshold for voter approval of special taxes for transportation from two-thirds to 55%. And that would help both for recommendation number 3 as well as the VTA extend and amend, which currently requires two-thirds approval. And this would provide sort of an easier opportunity to pursue those tax measures. Might add, this is something that's consistent with the City Council's approved legislative priorities. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to address any questions and help facilitate your discussion here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we get into the council discussion, I had some additional information I wanted to get out from previous reports. I've got a slide that I like to put up because when I talk to people, they always want to know, well, what happened to the money? And I know we have some people who are going to speak on that, and here's part of what happened to the money. As you can see, we've got a cumulative, a current pavement maintenance backlog of $339 million. That's in the staff report. And if you look at the cumulative increase in retirement costs in the last decade, it's more than twice the size of our backlog. So we put a lot of money into retirement costs. We've had plenty of discussions about that. And street maintenance is one of the things that's taken a hit. And the reason for that is if you look at our community priorities based on the poll, most recent poll and previous polls, while street maintenance is important, it's not quite as important as police, fire, libraries, community centers. So it tends to come out last on those top priorities and gets less money than it should. And I remember when I first got onto the city council, a decade, 12 years ago, we were in the third year of a 10-year plan to restore pavement maintenance. And we had just come through 5 years of rapid growth, revenues going up faster than expenses, ending fund balances increasing, and we still fell behind on pavement maintenance. So it's definitely a problem, and I think the only solution is some sort of a dedicated funding source. Otherwise, it just always gets squeezed out in the competition for the general fund dollars. That then takes me to the polling that we've done. January of 12, we asked about a $95 parcel tax to fund city infrastructure resources, mostly around streets. That, if you include the leaners, got to 51%. In July of 12, we polled on support for an infrastructure bond measure. It's not a tax, it's a bond measure. That polled at 56% if you include the leaners. And January of this year, we polled on a $97 parcel tax dedicated to streets and roads. And if you include the leaners, that got to 54%. So it's never going to get to two-thirds. And even if the legislature reduces it to 55%, it's a hard sell. And that, unfortunately, is the reality we have to deal with in terms of finding some funding sources for this. Vice Mayor Nguyen.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I wanted to thank my colleagues for the various memos. Obviously, this is a very significant matter before us, and that's one of the reasons why we received so many memos and so many interests from individual council members. But I also wanted to take the opportunity to thank Hans and his team, and also Betsy Shotwell, for taking the time to speak with my staff about this issue in regards to, as we prepare for this meeting. For years, all of us up here have probably heard directly from our constituents, and we probably have experienced ourselves what it's like to drive down a street that the city seems to have forgotten about. And the current conditions of the roads, of our roads, is just merely unacceptable. We can't continue to tell people to wait, and that the problem will be taken care of one day. We need real answers, and I think what staff has in front of us today will provide comprehensive solutions to some of the issues that we have to deal with. But basic infrastructure maintenance cannot be continually deferred if we really want residents to maintain pride in our city. This is also an investment in our economic future. We can't afford for the deferred payment maintenance to hit $870 million in 2020. Those days will come very, very soon. So we have to be willing to make tough decisions. We can't really kick this down the road to the next council and the next council and the next council. And that's why I, along with Councilmember Javier Campos, put out a memo to address some of those concerns and hopefully provide some solutions so that we can address this issue. So at this time, I'd like to make a motion to approve my memo along with Councilmember Javier Campos dated February 28, 2013.
All right, we have a motion on the floor.
And Mayor, if I can just
Vice Mayor.
address some of the different segments that I have here in the memo. In regards to item A, I think it makes sense for us to continue to work with VTA to examine the 30-year extension option. I know that all of us just received this letter and that we should move forward cautiously as General Manager Michael Burns inform us, but I think that we should continue to pursue that option. I don't think that we should ask for a permanent tax increase from the Measure A. I think that's very, very irresponsible, but given the fact that if there is a sunset date, voters would probably be more likely to support than having something that is permanent. So that's the direction that I would like support from my colleagues. In regards to to item B, as the mayor stated, and we have seen from the phone survey, we have seen roughly 57% of our voters said that they will support a half-cent sales tax for general funds issues, and obviously pavement maintenance will be included in that. A quarter-cent sales tax, I don't think is feasible. That would only restore $30 million, and it would just merely put a dent in the pavement maintenance backlog. And so that's not an option that I think we should look at. We have the numbers. We have confidence from our voters that this is something that they're willing to support. And given the fact that back in November, when we saw all the sales tax measures passed both from the state and here at the local level, I think this is an option that we should try to pursue. In regards to C, in the past 30 years, we haven't had a transportation dedicated bond measure. I think it's time that we take a look at this. Whether it's not as feasible, that's something that for us to decide. But I think that we should seriously take a look at this option and pursue that. And then D, which is probably the most controversial issues on this item, we have heard from residents throughout the city, some call to oppose, some call to support, but I think that we really don't have a choice here. We have a dire situations where we really need to address our infrastructure, and I think that, like the mayor said, lowering this to 55% instead of keeping at 2/3 and encouraging the legislature to do so is the right way to go. Again, this is not in our hands. This is really at the state level. But I think that if we send a very clear message that this is something that we need, hopefully we can get support from our local state legislators. And so for those reasons, I hope to have support from my colleagues, and I hope that this is something that we can actually believe that it's really important. It's important for our cities and important for our residents. And again, it's important that we all take pride in our city. Thank you.
Councilmember Rocha.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll cut to the chase here and ask a question of the Vice Mayor. In some cases, the council would consider other recommendations or memorandums from some of their colleagues if they're not in direct conflict, of course, or contradictory to the direction included. And I would point to maybe the memo by Councilmember Herrera and myself as potential memos that might be incorporated in the direction for staff to do an analysis on and brought back forward. Would that be something you'd be willing to consider?
Absolutely. The only question I have is actually in regards to your member, Councilmember Rocha. It's the library parcel tax. I'm not really sure, and I would probably look to the city attorney or staff to help me with this, but since we're dealing with the infrastructure in regards to transportation, I'm not really sure if the library parcel tax is something that we can include, or if asking staff to look at this and come back separately, that would be something that I would entertain.
Right, I think we would have to analyze, because there are some limitations on the number of items that can be on a single ballot measure. So they may have to be separate ballot measures if you wanted to move them forward. So it's something that we can come back with you with some information.
If I could clarify, it's a great point, Councilman or Vice Mayor Nguyen, because I also was thinking about that, and also in terms of given the scope of this item, whether or not that was some direction you would be given under this. But I think the context of this item for me is what our strategy for ballot measures, and really looking at this and weighing this against any other ones that we're going to consider in the future. And for me, it was difficult to make a decision on the validity or the importance of one or priority of one over all the other ones and how we approach it. I think going after 3 or 4 or 5, obviously I don't think any of us believe that would be a good strategy. So I wanted to have that council discussion on where are we going to put our efforts. And I thought the context of having that discussion would be a good one, as opposed to sending staff on a significant amount of work and then only to pull the rug out from underneath them in 2-3 months and say, you know what, we're going after a library parcel tax extension instead, and we just don't have the bandwidth for this. So that's why I was looking for us to get a good opportunity for us to talk about where do we want to put our energy. So that's why I had included it.
If that's the intent of your memo, then I think that would be fine.
Okay, thank you. You in the second are comfortable with a? Thank you.
Okay, so we have that was to add your memorandum, Councilmember Rocha. Although you mentioned Councilmember Herrera's memorandum too. You didn't specifically mention
that would be fine. I mean, this is just for staff to do more analysis and have more communications with folks, so that we can better achieve the results that we want.
Okay, so we're including both those memos in the motion. All right, let me make a couple of suggestions trying to sort this out, having some conversations with staff about it. It seems to me we're talking about a potential ballot measure in June of 2014. That to have something before that requires a unanimous declaration of fiscal emergency by this council. I predict that's unlikely to happen. So we're really talking about June of 14. We don't have to make a decision on the June ballot until probably the first week in March of 14. I think that's too late because it doesn't give much time to get organized, raise money, and do all the things you have to have for a campaign. Seems to me that what we ought to do is to consider all of the potential ballot measures in October, do some polling in September, and probably have a discussion in August of some of the framing of the potential ballot measures between the library parcel tax, the pavement maintenance, sales tax measure, some others that are still being discussed in some of the other areas that we're at. We try to look at the package and figure out in October, if we can, what might go on the ballot in June to give plenty of time to deal with it, and perhaps if the polling data is good enough, what ought to go on the ballot in November of 14. And we do that as a package. It's essentially a priority setting discussion of what is the most important thing to move ahead with and what time frame. Because I don't think we can move ahead with 5 or 6 tax measures. I don't think that'll be successful for any of them, and I certainly wouldn't support that. So Well, we haven't given any direction to staff about the timing of that, so I'd like staff to have a chance to talk about what you see as sort of the work coming out of this discussion, not just about one item, but multiple items, and how you can line this all up, because I know that you have a healthy argument going on internally among the staff as to what's the most important, which of our children do we love the most, and all those kinds of things. And you'll have to sort that out in order to make some recommendations, but I think we need to poll in September again to see where we are at a minimum. Ed?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The discussion is very helpful, and to your point, there clearly needs to be some sorting out even within or among staff in order to bring forward some recommendations that the council can then deliberate on. In addition to the polling, which clearly has to be a part of the mix, the relative needs, the magnitude of the needs, and clearly transportation has a big dollar impact to it, and the mix, as has been discussed here, of potential multi-pronged strategies, whether they be local and involving other prospective funding partners as well. The other piece that we haven't really discussed is the stakeholder support and the extent to which external parties will participate positively in helping to get a ballot measure passed. So I think all of those are components that staff could do some additional groundwork on and identify where our prospective partners are likely to be on the individual areas and bring that forward as we head to that August timeframe that the mayor suggested.
Councilor Constant.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'm glad we're having this discussion. We've talked about infrastructure quite a bit over the years, and we have the deferred issues, not only in our streets, but in a lot of areas in our city. So I'm glad we're talking about it. I think that we do need to explore all options. Personally, I prefer, from the staff memo, C, where it's a street bond program, where it's really clearly defined. We can put exactly what we're doing, have a defined time period, a clear price tag, and it's just very clear to the residents of San Jose. I would ask that the maker of the motion, perhaps you would not mind if we bifurcate the vote so we can vote on everything but the tax part, the threshold part, and then vote on the threshold part second. If you're amicable to that, then I have some comments.
So the request is a separate vote on whether to advocate for the 55%.
Right.
I guess if I can get you to agree to A, B, and C, then I guess I'll take my chances. So yes, that would be fine. We can bifurcate that.
Okay, I think it's important that we do that, and I know it's in our legislative priorities, although when we vote on our legislative priorities, we're voting on a block of things, and you vote based on where you are on the majority of the issues. But I'll tell you, if the state continues to look at lowering the thresholds, and I'm sure everyone here knows our new legislature is pretty much a one-party system right now, and there are at least 4 separate Senate constitutional amendments pending right now, all lowering thresholds for different particular pet projects, whether they be local transportation or library or community and economic development. There's SCA 3, 4, 7, and 9 are the ones I found quickly, and I didn't even look at on the assembly side. And what we're doing is setting up our state for another taxpayer revolt, because if you keep breaking down the taxpayer protections that our residents have overwhelmingly supported in the past, then I bet you they're going to go and they're going to make it a lot more difficult for governments to do any type of ballot measure. I think Councilmember CAMIS's new memo that he has, he talks about how well the transportation measures have done with the 2/3 vote in our county, because our residents get it and there's a compelling argument that's made for them, and when they believe that they can trust the government to do what we say and we're defined in what we're doing, they support us. But we can't ignore the fact that the voters throughout California on two separate occasions with Prop 13 and Prop 218 very clearly and overwhelmingly supported the two-thirds vote of the electorate to put these special taxes on. And I think that all these efforts to erode it are bad for the taxpayers, and I don't really think that when you have the public who votes overwhelmingly multiple times that the legislature should be able to just undo it. They should send it back to the voters for a vote. So with that being said, I don't support the 55%, although I support the intent of us really addressing our infrastructure needs because we have a responsibility to do that. So I'm hoping that we'll pass the first half and not pass the last item. And if the legislature continues to be as pro-tax as they have been, I think there's going to be a big revolt, and I might even be the one who fires the first shot and rallying people up.
Councilmember KALRA.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank KANSEN and the whole team, Betsy and the city manager's office for vetting these issues, and I know we're going to have continued discussion on them as we should, as we determine the best strategy to maintain or at least increase the opportunity to maintain our streets and find avenues for more revenues. As we know, that's part of the fiscal reform plan that has kind of been in the shadows more than others, is the revenue generation aspect of it. Obviously, it doesn't have to necessarily just be going to the voters for a sales tax. There are other avenues, and I think these offer a variety of options that I think we do need to consider. I think it's only responsible that we consider all the options. And I think that the mayor is right in the sense that these aren't going to go to the voters tomorrow. There is some luxury of time, but we do need to come to some consensus. And I think that it's helpful for us going forward to be able to give the staff some guidance as to the different options. And I appreciate these options presented to us, and I also appreciate Mr. Burns from VTA indicating his interest in working with the city in crafting a potential extend and amend option for the Measure A tax program. And so, I'm supportive of the motion on the table, and I'm also supportive of supporting state legislation to reduce the threshold. And I want to ask Betsy on that, because I know that although there have been several proposals, when my understanding is that not all of them are going to make it through the process, and that's obviously different legislators put certain proposals forward, they get vetted by the different committees and what have you. Is there any sense right now of what, at this moment, and I know it can change next week, but at this moment, some sense as to which measures have a greater likelihood of going forward?
There really isn't at this point in time. There will be further down the road. These measures don't have the same deadlines that normal regular bills do, so it's not hard and fast. It has to be out of committee next month. It could go into next year, and in fact, the deadline would be end of June of next year for the Secretary of State to place any of these on the November 2014 ballot. So we have a ways to go. But we were able last year with ACA 23, it actually moved along fairly well until, of course, the end. But that said, we still have a ways to go to make that determination.
Okay, and my sense is that the greatest likelihood, at least at this moment, seems to be the funds dedicated to transit or transportation seems to be more likely than most at this point. However, I know there's going to be advocates for education and others as well that will come forward. I think a lot of that will depend on how the budget cycle, how they go through the budget cycle, and how some of the current funding gets allocated. But yeah, so I mean, as we go forward, certainly I think that we have a recognition of how challenging it is for us to get funding, as Councilor KANSEN indicated, for maintenance. It's not necessarily the sexiest thing to go to the voters for. As the mayor indicated, that polling does show that although there may be opportunities to eclipse 55%, that 2/3 is almost impossible, given the fact that when put up against libraries and parks and police officers, it's really not realistic that you're going to get the voters to approve the pavement maintenance, although we know that how important, how critical a role that plays. And I don't the lowering of the threshold is really about California, in my estimation, allowing local jurisdictions to be able to put tax measures and sell it to their own voters. But the reality is that we've slipped a lot in this state in terms of our ability to maintain our infrastructure. And allowing local jurisdictions to go to the voters on infrastructure funds for libraries or transportation or street maintenance, I don't see that as pet projects. As we know in our own community, from what our residents ask for, these are vital services that we provide to the residents. As far as any taxpayer vote, what have you, I mean, that's up to the electorate to decide how they want to respond to whatever the state does or local jurisdictions do. But I do think that residents are realizing, we saw that with Prop 30 last year, and we've seen that with tax measures that have been approved over the last election cycle throughout the state. The residents are realizing that our state that once had some of the finest infrastructure in the nation, some of the best public schools in the world, has certainly slipped over the past few decades, and a lot of that has to do with the capacity and the ability to generate revenue. And that if we really want to be able to move the state forward, we have to have the revenue to do it. But I do think that it has to be fully transparent and accountable. I agree that it obviously clearly has to have a sunset to it, and I think those are important too, because it allows not just the voters but the policymakers to evaluate how the funds have been used and whether those projects have been effective, and then you can then sell the success of the program to the voters and let them decide if they want to continue the tax, as if just like we'll have to do with Measure A funds. If we renew that, or if we renew that one, or we extend and amend that, part of the campaign is to say, let the voters know what we have done with that money, with their money, and so, I think that the reality is that we need to invest more, certainly at the local level, and I think that this gives us an opportunity to improve our streets in a way that really, it's really unlikely to get any other dedicated funding source, as the mayor said, for that type of work. And so at this point, I'm fully open to exploring all of it, as well as item D, and look forward to the continued discussion on this. And want to hands thank you once again.
Councilmember KHAMIS.
Yeah, first I want to thank Vice Mayor Madison Nguyen for bifurcating the item. It's obvious to me that the city, the county, and the state are very adept at passing taxes. I think just in this last year, we've passed Prop 30, Prop 39, Measure B locally with the water district. The county passed the sales tax. We have, in my own district, a Measure H that only needed 55% approval that passed with 70%. So the fact that the community passed this, to me, signifies that we don't need to lower the hurdles. So sending the message to the State Assembly, I think, sends the wrong message. And I think I wanted to thank my colleagues. I really respect the work that you have done over the last few years. I know it's been a very, very tough time dealing with budget deficits and what have you. But I think that going that direction sends the wrong message. I think other city council previously in the past have not managed our money so well, possibly putting us into the position where you had to make cuts all these years. So I will be supporting the measure from the Vice Mayor, because I think we do need to pursue the funding options. But I would never agree to lowering the hurdles to passing those, because I think infrastructure projects and other special projects need a majority of the voters to be behind it. And I think that if we lowered it, it will open the door for every department to ask, okay, like he said, which one is our favorite child? I think a case could be made for public safety. A case could be made for the libraries. A case could be made for every one of our departments, I think, and we could be snowballing us into lots of taxes and making us uncompetitive. So I will be supporting the measure, but I'm hoping that all of you will support not sending that message to the State Assembly.
Councilmember Herrera.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to thank Hans for putting this issue front and center with all of the options and really having us think about it. And Pete Constant, you have been talking about infrastructure ever since I got on this council. I used to hear the weekly speech from him about how we needed to deal with infrastructure. So I know this is a happy day for you that we're dealing with this. I appreciate my colleagues' memos and in particular Vice Mayor Nguyen for putting this together. My only concern in putting out a memo at all was just to make sure that we stop and think about what Measure A has meant and the projects, the very significant projects that are going to be completed using Measure A, especially the Phase 2 extension of BART from Berryessa through downtown San Jose, Caltrain electrification and bus rapid transit service, as well as light rail, a light rail project that is still yet to be completed in East San Jose. And I just need to say that the voters have voted for this, and with these projects explicitly detailed every time they voted. And so I think as we look at new projects or new uses for this money and extending it, I think we also need to keep in mind that we need to keep faith with voters in terms of things that we have promised them when we ask them to vote for these things. And so Measure A has these projects. We're working hard on that. I was gratified to see the letter from Michael Burns. I did reach out to VTA after I wrote my memo, and I was happy to see that he submitted a letter supporting working together, but again, making sure that we're mindful of these projects. I support the other portions of Vice Mayor's memo, and I just wanted to say, in terms of lowering the voter threshold, I'm on the Transportation Committee for League of Cities, and we've debated that, and there is some dissension at the League of Cities about that from some of the smaller cities who are worried that the state's sort of abdicating its role in moving these things forward and leaving it to the cities, and that we are going to be the ones having to do this and not having the state do it. But I think we're in a situation where we have to figure out how to move some things forward for our city. And we have to look at all the options. And one of those is to create an opportunity for us to be able to pass a measure that will help us fund things like pavement maintenance. I don't think it's that simple that we can guarantee that happening. That said, though, it looks like in 2014 we're not going to have that ability anyway, because this would have to go to the voters, right, Betsy? Assuming this, passes legislature, it goes to the voters.
That's correct.
This, right?
If they pass, they get the 2/3 vote necessary, the Secretary of State would put them on the November 2014 ballot.
So we are going to be faced with needing 2/3 if we're doing a special, one of these special taxes. It's not going to be a tool for us in 2014.
Well, that's a good question, and one that I'm curious about, City Attorney, is if this were to pass in November at the state level and at the local level, how do you envision that?
Yeah, there are ballot measures that are conditioned on other ballot measures or conditioned on certain things happening on another ballot measure. My understanding, however, and we can get back to the council, is that a constitutional amendment takes effect the day after the election. So that change in the requirement would not occur until after the election, which means the election would be based on the prior requirements. So that it wouldn't, couldn't have concurrent ballot measures that you're relying on. And we can clarify that, but that's my understanding.
That was what I was thinking, but at any rate, we probably are going to need to pass to achieve that 2/3 threshold with some of this. And I think it's really important. I appreciate Councilmember Rocha's supporting my memo being included as well as his, because I think he's bringing up something I was thinking about, and that's that, we just have a lot of needs here and a lot of different potential measures. And so I think that the mayor's outlining of how we look at this, the August, September, and October timeframes of polling and really putting together some strategies for moving some of these things forward is very critical. And we're going to need to have a united front to go before the voters. We're going to need, hopefully business and labor join hands and work together to get something passed that we all agree on. I mean, we're going to need that kind of cooperation and working together, I think, along with the support of the community to move some of these things forward. So reluctantly, I am not a big fan of just making it very easy to pass taxes, but I think we need the tools, we need some tools here locally to get some things done. And $870 million a price tag sitting out there at 2020 is not acceptable. That's not responsible either for us not to deal with that. The one thing I want to say finally on this is I just want to make sure whatever we do that we make sure that the state can't take the money away from us if we pass something like this. That's my my other fear is we pass measures and then the money gets taken from us. I mean, that just cannot happen. So we need to be thinking about that too. So, thank you.
Councilmember Campos.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Hans, and for all the great work you put into the analysis, and Betsy for the feedback on the pulse of the Capitol, and Vice Mayor for including me in your memo. All one needs to do, and we all have this in our districts, is just not just drive the main thoroughfares, but go into neighborhoods and we can see how our streets have deteriorated. Whether it's going down Minnesota and finding your way to Mackey, which I believe is probably the worst street in the city, and I'm sure if Councilmember Oliverio was sitting here, he'd probably agree with me, or on Story Road or Fleming. Our streets are deteriorating, and the cost is not, the cost comes somewhere. So the residents are paying right now on vehicle maintenance. You could probably make an argument that the vast majority of vehicles that drive our roads consistently to and from their place of business and into their neighborhoods at some point have to have more than normal tire alignment. And if you don't do it, then you're paying for a set of tires. Or if you go through a severe pothole that just popped up because of a bad rainstorm, you risk a dented or a cracked wheel, a rim. Our residents are demanding for us to do something. And for me, the pulse is at our neighborhood associations. I can't tell you how happy my neighborhood groups were to hear when I brought them the news that Story Road was on the list for repaving this year. It's a main thoroughfare. It's not their neighborhood, but the fact that they use it predominantly to get to and from, it's relief to them that we're finally doing something about at least that portion of the streets. And I'm sure that that's probably the case in many of my colleagues' neighborhoods. But the fact is that we have to do something. I think this is a great start, and I'm anxious to see the results of some of the work, some of the continued work that you hands are going to do. And and I remember barely, because I was still a kid back in the 70s, how our roads in California, they were the envy of of the country. We had some of the best roads in the nation, and now we have some of the worst roads in the nation. And I would think that before the taxpayer revolt of the 70s, we did have good roads. We were able to put money into the infrastructure that made this state great back then. I think at the end of the day, the voters will do its best for them. And I think we all are in agreement that, we think that the voters are willing to weigh in on this. And I think we're pretty sure that we'll get a positive result out of this. So thank you, Vice Mayor.
Councilmember Liccardo.
Thanks, Mayor. Vice Mayor, I was hoping I could clarify some of the direction in the memo, because I know you said some things verbally, and I want to understand if that clarifies or adds. As you look at A and the recommendation, I think you verbally stated something relating to a specific direction relating to the duration of the extend and amend, and preferring a defined duration as opposed to essentially an internal tax, if there is such a thing. Is that fair to say? I'm just trying to understand, is that part of the motion? It's not in the text of the memo and the recommendation. I'm just trying to understand if that's part of the motion or not.
The way I read staff report is either to make the existing tax permanent or at least extend for 30 years. And I'm just simply asking to extend it for 30 years. So that's based on staff recommendation.
Okay, I understand that. I think, though, what we want to do is understand what polling might reveal to us about what options are the best in terms of both giving us the most bonding capacity, because that is constrained by durations, and frankly, we don't know at this point what voters are willing or not willing to approve. And so I would just ask as a friendly amendment, could we leave that for later decision when we better understand what the right approach is? I think at this point, we just don't know.
So you're asking that, in particular to this item, that staff just explore the other possibility of a permanent tax increase, and then we can poll.
I don't know
folks in
what the
August?
duration should be. The problem is, it says 30 years here, and we may find out both from an economic or financial analysis, really, financial analysis from VTA, and from polling that the right duration should be 20 years, or the right duration should be 40. And I think at this point, we probably don't want to define it.
And that's fine. I just don't want this to be a permanent tax increase. So if you can just leave that option out, it could be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. That's not a big concern for me.
I appreciate that. I think it's just important. We're going to learn a lot in the next few months about what's viable, and I think it's important for us to keep our options open. I appreciate you accepting the friendly
Okay, so
amendment.
that's a friendly amendment. Also, okay with a seconder, so we have a friendly amendment.
And then with regard to item D, I understood from your verbal comments that you expressed strong support for legislation to reduce the threshold. The literal text of the recommendation, if this is viewed as an amendment, which is what this says, is direction for staff to make the following amendments, it would suggest that we not take a position, but simply have staff report back. And so I just want to understand, is your recommendation to take a position or to not take a position?
I would like for us to take a position.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you for the clarification.
And the taking position item will be bifurcated for voting.
Right.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed. Okay. And then finally, to understand B, and I appreciate your clarifications, when you say determine the impact, I know that numbers have been frequently used. I think the number is somewhere around 65 million or so that we would get out of half-cent tax. Are you looking for staff to identify what share should go to pavement, or what exactly do you mean by impact?
That could be part of it, but what I'm interested in is if we're looking at a half-cent sales tax, and we're getting a certain amount of money, I'm not sure what that exact number will be, but for staff to come back to council and let us know this percentage will go here, this percentage will go here, and that's all that I'm looking at. And it's still very general. I think we have an opportunity to discuss that, to see where this council feels where it should go, whether it's to improve the roads that are in poor shape, or the roads that need a little bit of fixing, or the roads that is just really devastated. We need to put all of it in that chunk, so we can determine that at a later point.
Okay. So I appreciate the clarification.
And I think that question should be brought back to the council in August.
Yes.
Right.
So that we can talk about that, figure that out, to frame up some polling that we should do in September.
I agree. I think which portion of the triangle we choose will have a big impact on the viability of the measure and its impact. So I appreciate the clarification. I think Councilmember Herrera was eager to jump in with a question. Did you want to clarify further?
No, I just would like to include the mayor's suggestions on that time frame, August, September, October, if that's okay with Madison.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I would agree. So I'm happy to support the memorandum. I wanted to ask Hans a question about, this is the first time I heard the number 15 to 20 million related to the potential annual pavement maintenance revenue we could generate from an extend and amend. And I know obviously there's a lot that still needs to be fleshed out. But what I'm particularly concerned about as we think about those numbers is as we embark on some of the more capital intensive portions of the BART construction, I know bonding capacity is going to be a paramount concern, or it's going to increasingly become a paramount concern for everybody on the VTA board, making sure we're staying within the required ratios. And at this point, is there any VTA or has there been any financial analysis to tell us how much room we're going to have with an extend and amend, assuming that if we were to get a full funding grant agreement from the federal government in the next 2 years to go forward with phase 2 of BART, I would imagine we'd all want to move very, very quickly, and that could gobble up a lot of capacity quickly, which is one reason why I appreciate Councilmember Herrera's raising the issue. Do we have any kind of independent analysis at this point?
Councilmember LICCARDO, we don't have that. I think we're looking forward to kind of sense of the council on how to move forward. So I think that's work that we would pursue with the VTA sort of between now and when we come back to the council in August. So the $15 to $20 million number is based on research that my staff did with other county transportation sales tax programs in terms of if we did something similar to what's typical across the state, that's the amount of money that would come to us as a city for pavement maintenance. So I think, yeah, looking at General Manager Burns' memo sort of indicates, support and working with us to look at it, but with some level of caution to balance this with other priorities that the VTA has. So we look forward to working with the VTA in the next couple of months to answer the question you just raised.
I appreciate that, and I know we've been working on it for several months already, and I appreciate your conversations with a lot of stakeholders around exploring this. I just wanted to briefly address, perhaps not so briefly, item D. I know that I know that it seems to be the subject of controversy. I think ultimately it's going to be irrelevant because I don't think, frankly, that polling supports, even if the legislature were to put this on the ballot statewide, I think it's going to fail anyway. So, the good news, Pete, is you can hold your fire on any tax revolt. I don't think it's going to get there. I mean, it might get to the ballot, but I don't think it's going to get much further based on everything I've heard. But it seems to me that, the larger issue is whether or not we want to make it easier or harder for us to be able to generate infrastructure dollars. And I do want to correct any misperception there might be. I don't think Pete meant it quite this way, but he said that, the state continues to look at reducing the 2/3 threshold. And the implication is that somehow or another we've been eating away at this almighty threshold that was given to us, with the Ten Commandments. And in reality, it was given to us with Prop 13. And since that time, the threshold actually has gone up, not down, with Prop 218 and then Prop 26, and really expanding the definition of tax and narrowing the definition of fee. And so I think we need to recognize that this is not a question of an erosion of a right of some kind. The truth is we have made it harder on ourselves as a state to be able to support basic infrastructure improvements. And the federal government has been of no help, and they've largely abdicated the responsibility in terms of updating a gas tax that would actually reflect inflation in any way. And in fact, hey, it's not just, I'm not just blaming Republicans, Pete. I mean, this is Democrats too. I can remember going back to DC a couple of years ago and talking to folks in the majority leadership who were far left of where I am, and they were saying, we're not going to touch it, it's a third rail. And so, really, the state and the federal government have been no help whatsoever. And I think we need to recognize that and recognize, really, because of the abdication responsibility, it falls entirely on local governments to figure it out. And it seems to me that we are the level of government that is closest to the people, that is most transparent, that is most accessible. People have, in polling, far more confidence that their dollars are going to be well used locally than they are going to be well used in other cities like Sacramento and Washington. And so I think it is appropriate that if you're going to lower a threshold, you do so on a local measure. And I very much appreciate the sentiment that Councilmember KHAMIS expresses that, hey, we seem to be successful when we really need to be. But I would just urge folks to think long and hard about, I can remember very well Measure B in 2008, because I worked a lot of hours raising money for that measure, advocating for that measure, and we lost that measure, or we believed we did. As of 2 weeks after the election, we were still counting votes, and only after the fact, then we somehow figured out by hundredths of a percent we were able to actually prevail. And we did so because we had incredible partners like Silicon Valley Leadership Group that were out there raising 7 figures in dollars to try to get something passed. And the only reason why we were out there raising 7 figures in dollars, both in 2000 and in 2008, was because that 2/3 threshold puts all the pressure to get that last marginal % or two to get over that threshold. If you didn't have to do that, you probably wouldn't have to fundraise at all because people would simply support this stuff. But instead, we're having to go to contractors and developers and landowners and lots of folks who have a financial interest in outcome. And God love them for giving us money, but I think the public would certainly prefer that we didn't go to all those folks and have to fundraise millions of dollars just to get a % or two to make that last bit of the threshold. And so, you know, these are public improvements, public roads, public transit. These are improvements that we all benefit from. I think we want a process where we're able to allow a majority, and certainly 55% is more than majority, to be able to make decisions about dollars and how they're spent. So I do appreciate the sentiment. I know there's great concern out there about lowering thresholds, but I'll be supporting the motion.
Councilor Rocha.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to follow up on a point that you made, and it's regarding the polling issue that you raised, Mayor. And to get a sense of, in your mind, did you see this poll as one of our standard ones where we talk about a lot of the issues that the city has, or were you looking at one more specific in terms of just 2 to 3 to 5 potential items we might put on the ballot?
Well, it could be broader, but you know, there are limits to how long you can make polls and have them useful. And we have a half a dozen measures that I can count that people are considering. So I think probably when we get out there into August, September, we're going to just do it on these ballot measures. Although you always throw some other stuff in there to help frame up the questions.
Yeah, my interest would be to limit the items, and the ones that we do is, to your point, you know, we could throw a whole bunch in there that we have still sitting on the list, but I think really within the 3 to 4 that we've talked about that we're serious about it, I think to get a good sense of the poll, in my opinion, would be a priority for me.
Well, I think it would be important to have enough time in a poll to try varieties of versions of the question.
Yes.
Because if we're just talking about how sales tax dollars might be spent, and that's something I think it's important to inform the voters. And if you're going to put more in one or more in the other, you want to split sample on some of those things. I think it'll take a good solid polling effort just on a few ballot measures and not be able to do a lot of other things at the same time.
Okay, thank you. And even though I just talked about the importance of the polling and how that's helpful, I also want to remind folks that I don't want to hang our hat on the results of a poll. If we always did that, there might be a few folks up here that wouldn't actually be up here. So we might be surprised on occasion by the voters, and you know, heck, I'm just as surprised as you are probably that I'm sitting here. So I think we should not, again, put too much significance on the results. Of course, they're going to help us a lot, but I'd hate for us to make a decision solely just based upon that. So thank you.
Councilmember KALRA.
Thank you. Just briefly in comment to some of the comments made by my colleagues. I agree with Councilor Herrera's sentiment that we have to get everyone in the community together. They're supported, as Councilor Carter referred to the leadership group. You know, there's been sentiment from the leadership group of support of lowering the threshold, and so that's definitely an opportunity that exists there, but there's still a lot of time to determine what direction to go and who we need to get support from, at least locally, if there's a statewide measure. And, you know, just to the point of you know, as Councilman LICCARDO, I think, put it very well as to why the onus has fallen on local jurisdictions. And I do think that local jurisdictions is the reason why you see a number of taxes pass is because there is more trust, I believe, in transparency at the local level. There's much more connectedness to any one of us than there is to a state or federal legislator, and we're held much more closely accountable. But I'd make note, as Councilmember KHAMIS indicated, that, you know, in order to get these kinds of taxes passed, we need a majority. We should definitely have a majority. Majority is 50% plus 1. You know, even a lowering of the threshold is still a supermajority. 55, 66 is a very hefty supermajority. So the discussion is still certainly to make sure it's a supermajority, and I think as it should be. But you know, there have been, as indicated in the staff report, the extension of measures similar to the one that VTA is going to have to go to the voters for was narrowly defeated in Alameda and LA County. because they nearly missed the 2/3 threshold. And we know how critical that measure is for VTAs, let alone the importance of San Jose, the VTA's operations, how critical that measure is. And so I think that we've seen this downward attention when it comes to tax measures, which at the end of the day is probably a good thing, that tax measures are passed more locally than in Sacramento or in DC, or having a gas tax that just kind of blindly goes to everyone and not really knowing, what, if any of that money you're going to get back to your own local jurisdiction for your roads and your infrastructure.
Councilmember Oliverio.
Thank you, Mayor Reed. Hans, thank you for including on page 10 the how much it costs to fix an individual street. So I think that's a good clarification for people that wonder, how much these things cost. And of course, that's one example, one street. And then understanding we're not really taking action here today, it's just a strategy. Staff, you're going to come back with all the extreme granular detail on all the options that are proposed. For example, if we choose to look at a bond-funded measure, all the costs of bonding. Someone could nod or say something. That would be great. Okay, I'm feeling pretty confident there. And then I think when it does come to the polling and the way the mayor laid it out, I think makes a lot of sense. And also, I think we're going to look seriously at 4 different measures to put before the voters. 1, a general sales tax. 2, a road infrastructure tax. 3, a library parcel tax. And 4, a tax for public safety interoperability technology. So those are 4 things we're going to have to figure out what's going to be there. And maybe there's something else that someone's planning, but those are ones that I know that are top of mind. And then Betsy, on the transit, or on the 55 2/3, that is for any and all methods of taxing the 55. So they don't care if it's a sales tax or a parcel tax or a bond, as long as it's for transportation.
It depends on the language in the actual measure. You'll see sales tax, you'll see bonds, you'll see parcel tax. It depends on the exact measure. And to Councilmember Constance's point an hour ago, there's quite a few measures, which it will be shared and disseminated with the council as we move into the legislative session.
So there'll be a future day when we're asked on a specific bill that's going to...
We are discussing that internally and reviewing these measures prior to taking whatever ones we do to rules.
So then today's the other vote, what we're going to do, that's really just, hey, I think it's a good idea, but we're not we don't have a bill, a specific,
We're reviewing a number of them currently.
And
internally.
Does staff see it as really pertinent to have this in conjunction with a pavement maintenance plan? Because if we don't have a specific one, it seems like it'd be a little bit easier if you had a specific one.
Do you have a sense?
Well, I think kind of the direction to pursue lowering the threshold, particularly for local transportation measures that include pavement maintenance, I think that support here today is helpful. I think, as Betsy indicated, when we're responding to a particular bill, I think that the normal process is we'll take those specifically to rules and get a council position on the specific bill language that we see in front of us.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Constant.
I just get a chance to tell Sam he's wrong, so I just want to do it publicly. It doesn't happen too often, but it is a right. In fact, Prop 218 is the Right to Vote on Taxes Act, and it's in our Constitution in California, so it is a right. And it does not require a vote of the people to make a constitutional amendment. You just need 2/3 of the vote of the Assembly and the Senate and the state. So the voters might not get a chance to reject this if any of the 4 Senate constitutional amendments, or I think there's 5 or 6 in the Assembly constitutional amendments, get through. And in fact, if you look at the Prop 218 language, it specifically refers to Prop 13 and how local governments and courts circumvented Prop 13, and that's what prompted 218 to come. And where you were right is the part about the local level, and the taxes at the local level are where the people trust us the most, and I think that's why they pass more often. But 13 and 218 specifically were giving local jurisdictions the ability to do that, and that's why it's so important to keep the local and the 2/3 together. So you're 2 times right, 2 times wrong. So you're batting 500.
You need 51% to win, though.
Mayor, may I respond briefly?
Sir, oh, please.
Thank you. I can't resist debating. That's right. Pierluigi's going to walk out for a while and get a drink. Yeah, I just would point out, Pete, I think the expectation is, even with a supermajority, and right now there's not a supermajority in the Senate with Michael Rubio having stepped down, I think it's unlikely even that there would be a 2/3 vote in both houses. I think this is almost certainly going to go to the voters. I can't imagine there will be support. Wow. It must have been something I said.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's cost-cutting measures.
I hope this isn't a sign that the Almighty actually agrees with Pete. Anyway, I'll continue while the lights go on and off. No, the point was this. We're almost certainly going to go to a vote because I think it's pretty clear there are enough Democrats that do not want to approve a change in the Constitution. This is going to go to the vote. I don't think it's going to get approved anyway. I think the point that I was making was this, that when we talk about a series of rights as inalienable rights, those set forth in our Bill of Rights, clearly we identify what those are. The fact that there are constitutional amendments virtually every election cycle which create new and exciting rights for all of us to ponder is interesting, but not really that fundamental, I think, as we all regard the operations of our democracy. That was certainly the intent in which I used the word right.
All right, we've lost our electronic signaling. I know somebody else wanted to speak on this before we lost it. I'm not sure it was Councilor KHAMIS. Okay.
Yeah, I also I want to ask Hans. I appreciate your report, and I noticed that you didn't ask in your report for any monies to come from our general fund. I think it should be. I think we should consider it in our budget cycle to see if we can add more money to your department through the general fund, through our budget process that we're undergoing right now. I think it would be extremely important to do that, so that, you know, to pin all our hopes on raising taxes so that we can fund your department is wrong. I think it's infrastructure is a vital and very important part of our city, and I think it's, you know, you had 4 suggestions, none of which is asking us to put more of the money from our budget, and which I find, you know, astounding. But I think that we as a city council need to think about that, putting more money in the budget for road maintenance and repairs.
We have a budget process. We're in the middle of it, so it could come up.
It could come up. I think Hans is just being realistic as to, you know, the capacity in the budget to allocate more. I mean, clearly there's some sources of revenue, which I think they use very wisely. So I would say the lack of that recommendation is just he's being realistic. I think to cover the local piece that you're anticipating would probably wipe out the entire library budget, or some, you know, very rash move. And so, again, I think, as the mayor said, the budget process will give you an opportunity, but it'll remind us all just how tight things are.
All right, we have lost power in the building for somehow we've got enough emergency power to keep the microphones on, which is unusual and unfortunate, so we can continue the meeting, but I don't think we have any of our electronics working, and probably not the TV feed or anything else, so it's really just this. So
the next speaker after Councilmember KHAMIS was Councilmember LICCARDO, because I had just looked before the power went out.
Councilmember LICCARDO had done his. I just wanted to add a couple of things. We have some people here who public want to speak. We'll get to that in a minute. A year ago, I don't know if it's exactly this day or this month, when we talked about the possibility of a tax measure going to the ballot last year, we had this kind of a discussion, and I pointed out there were 7 factors in trying to decide whether or not your ballot measure can win. And I want to go through those again, because some people were surprised and disappointed in August when I didn't support putting a sales tax measure on the ballot. So let me just tell you, you know, this is me, my thinking about what you need to win. First is positive polling. That's just one factor. As Councilmember Rocha pointed out, there are other factors. Second factor is, what are you going to spend the money on? Third factor is, what does the public think you're going to spend the money on? Those are not necessarily the same things. Is there a coalition of support? And in most cases, is there labor and business support, typically? Will the opposition be funded? There will always be opposition, but will the opposition be funded? Who will raise the money? And how much money can they raise? And if all the answers to those questions are, I don't know, then I'm not going to be supporting going ahead with any ballot measure, because it's a lot of work to win a ballot measure, a tax measure in particular, and we don't put these things on lightly, and we don't take it on lightly. So there's work to be done by the advocates for one kind of measure or another between now and August and September and October when we're making these decisions. But there are things that we're going to have to figure out how to put together something, and this positive polling is only the beginning. With that, I think all my council members got a chance to speak more than once if they wanted it. I'm going to take public testimony now. Hopefully the microphone is working down here at the podium. So please come on down when I call your name. Ken Kelly, Robert Sandoval. Timer doesn't work, but we've got it. We have an alternate. We're still timing, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, all right. My name is Ken Kelly. I'm president of United Neighborhoods of Santa Clara County and a member of the Cambrian Community Council in District 9. At the mayor's community budget priority session on January 26, one of the hot topics of discussion was tax increases and street paving. While we have yet to see the cumulative results of that morning session, our discussion at my roundtable was of the opinion that any tax increases will be difficult, especially with a 2/3 majority needed to pass. The burden on the San Jose taxpayer is already rising along with the parcel tax passages last year. Couple that with the announcement that the California gasoline excise tax increase on July 1st means that we'll be paying 40 cents a gallon just for taxes. And the council needs to be prepared and prudent as it presents yet more taxes. One of my colleagues mentioned something called tax fatigue. I think it's something we need to keep in mind. Again, not knowing the cumulative results of the budget priority session, which we as neighborhood associations would like to hear about, Mr. Mayor, it was clear at our discussion table that street paving absolutely is needed, but that we need to do it intelligently and cost effectively. We recommend that temporary fixes such as sealing the pavement is Band-Aids only, and that what money is available be used for good repair or rehabilitation work. Our neighborhoods are wondering how they can help. Where I live, taking it to a local issue, in District 9, for example, there's a stretch of Foxworthy Avenue between Meridian Avenue and Manda Drive that's virtually undrivable. If you were to go on that, as Councilmember Campos was suggesting, probably part of your suspension would fall out. The neighbors surrounding Door Park in my neighborhood are taking matters into their own hands, and they're actually patching potholes and small cracks in the pavement themselves.
Sorry, your time is up.
All right, thank you very much. We would simply ask that the neighborhoods be included in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Robert Sandoval, and then David Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Madison Nguyen, Councilmember Rose Herrera, and council members. My name is Robert Sandoval. I'm in agreement with the proposal that our Vice Mayor has made because of the fact that if you drive some of these streets, because I'm also, as a commissioner in District 7, neighborhood commissioner, I drive a lot of our District 7 roads, and they are in dire need. I've been here since 1942, my family, in San Jose, and these are the worst times that I have seen our roads comparing to those days back then. I believe that if you put this to a vote, as it's been suggested by several of you council members, officials of our city, that during the summit that we had with our
in January, I believe it was, Mayor Reed, where we met, and a lot of the community leaders agreed to a bond proposal for street maintenance because they understand the need of the city and maintain this beautiful, wonderful city that we have. And I totally agree with you with that proposal. Thank you.
David Wall, and then our own neighbor.
Sir, what this council needs to do is to rebuild the trust of the community. And I mean this sincerely because you, sir, has been in the public saddle for at least 14 years, and all of a sudden the sky is falling with road repairs. And that goes for everybody that is before me with the exception of the newcomer from District 10. You've all had an opportunity to stand forth and understand what dedicated funds are, and that's what has to happen here. But, Mr. Mayor, look how the city has violated a dedicated fund called the Sewer Service and Use Charge. That's governed by Proposition 218. The city of San Jose has been severely humiliated by South Bay Water Recycling and its expansion misusing a dedicated fund. So what we need here, if you're going to construct a fund, there must be civil and criminal penalties for ministerial misuse of dedicated funds. And then you look at the broader picture of the city, which some of you are running for mayor really don't understand from the beginning, is that every city department should be a dedicated fund. And how you go about it is a decision-making process. And none of you have done this. And so therefore, we have a conundrum. Why now? How are you going to raise the money? And you have to build the trust back. Because to be honest with you, I wouldn't trust you. Raising another parcel tax, you got to be kidding me. You ought to be reformulating parcel taxes to raise an enormous amount of money by taxing the apartments, the high-density living unit as individual units, as individual parcels within a larger parcel. But no, that concept eludes you. As to Councilmember Liccardo's comment about the Almighty.
Sorry, the Almighty says your time is up. Our own neighbor, I'm just passing on the message. Our own neighbor, followed by Dorothy Kane.
I don't think God's within 1,500 miles of this thing. Because I'm not a government member, I can't compel you to agree with me, so I have to persuade you, unfortunately. With regard to the two-thirds supermajority, the reason why it exists is to mitigate optimism bias. This is the cognitive fallacy that elected officials and voters both have, which is where they overestimate the benefits of taking action and undermine the costs of taking action. The reason why the two-thirds exists is so that if you do have something that is rational and immediate and imperative, chances are you can get that. By saying that, no, we want 1/9 less than that, we want 55%, to say, yeah, we're not exactly eager to make something as rational, imperative, and immediate as necessary. Also, the thing that we all know is the more esoteric the nature of a tax or a bond, the more likely it's going to reach a 55 or 50% margin. That's just standard probability and normal distribution curves. So I say to the people that claim that it's immediate and imperative, good. That supports the argument to say speciously that, oh, therefore we need to lower it. No, if it's immediate and imperative and an emergency, then one should say, yeah, we should have no problem persuading people with this immediate, imperative, emergency rhetoric that we should pass this measure or pass any tax or any ballot initiative or, not ballot initiative, bond, excuse me. That's what happens when you go off script. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. If you believe it's an emergency, support the two-thirds. To say that it's an emergency, therefore support 55%, that doesn't follow. Thank you.
Dorothy Kane, Drew Spitzer. That's it. That's all the cards I have. That concludes public testimony on this. We have a motion. I don't know if there are any additional requests to speak. If the first motion will be on everything except the recommendation by staff, number D, which was the 55% question. So on everything except whether or not to support the 55% threshold change, on that motion, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? I count none opposed, so that part of the motion carries. Now on the recommendation from staff to support state legislation allowing a 55% voter approval level, on that motion, all in favor? Opposed? I count 1 opposed, 2 opposed, CAMPOS and Constant being opposed, so that passes on a 9-2 vote. That concludes our work on that item. I think the remaining item is open forum. Councilmember Rocha.
Thank you, Mayor. For the record, I am speaking under all the abilities as a public member of the public on this item, and I wanted to raise an issue to my colleagues that I thought was important, and I'd like to see if I can get some support from my colleagues in terms of considering this as a full council. Last week at the Rules Committee, we heard a proposal from myself and Councilmember Campos on immigration reform, and the Rules Committee deadlocked on a 2-2 vote whether or not to proceed with that. So I'm here asking that at some point that this full council consider this item sooner rather than later. We have a backlog on our Rules Committee reports, and I recognize that's probably the proper way to go about this, and I'm all for procedures, but if we're backlogged, I believe, back to September in terms of the minutes from the Rules Committee, that really, if there is an item that's ripe or important or that maybe the full council might consider important, we're looking at 5 months out, and I'm not sure if that's in the best interest of the public or this council.
Let me just speak to this. In the ordinary course, when we're caught up with the Rules Committee minutes, Tony is doing her best to get caught up on Rules Committee minutes. We're just backlogged. The Rules Committee report would come to the council. Last meeting would be at the council next week in the ordinary course. So I'm wondering if the clerk could get those minutes to the council next week so it would jump to the head of the line, I suppose.
Yes, I already have them prepared on my desk.
Okay, so I would suggest that's what we do. We just bring those minutes forward, and then the council can, as part of the dealing with the minutes like we usually would, take up that issue.
And as part of that, so we could, March 12th will be the next council meeting.
I can add it to the agenda as an add at rules this week.
And
make sure it's on there.
A cross-reference for the item that I just referenced? Would that be something for the Rules Committee? Or would that be something just process-wise?
It would just be listed as in the consent calendar under the rules reports 2.3, approval of council committee reports, and it would have that date, and then you could pull the minutes for that date.
Given the urgency of the item and the potential legislation that Congress might be considering, I'd like to have the item heard sooner rather than later.
It'll be on for, I can get it on for next week.
I was referring more to maybe asking the full council to consider a cross-reference on this item, as opposed to going to the 12th and then having to pull the report and then asking it to be agendized for the 19th. It's my understanding that there's 2 members of this council that aren't going to be here on the 19th, and I'm sure, regardless of whether you stand on this issue, that they would prefer to have a voice in that matter. And if we, on the 12th, decided to pull it and go to the 19th, they might not be here. So,
City Attorney, any comments on how we
One of the few exceptions under the Brown Act with regard to actions that are not on the agenda is simply to give direction to staff to place an item on a future agenda. So to the extent that the request is to put the rules minutes on the agenda, that can be done. To the extent that the direction is to put a specific item on a future agenda without having any discussion of the item, that direction can be requested of staff. So the question is, what is the direction? That you put a specific item or that you simply put the rules minutes? Because it can happen either way. The rules minutes will have the item can be pulled, you can have a discussion of the item. If a specific action is requested, then that's the specific action that's being directed to be placed on the agenda.
So if the council today says next week bring the rules minutes and cross-reference that particular item so we can deal with both?
That is the direction of the business to be placed on the agenda.
So we could do that here?
Yes.
Under the Brown Act and all of our,
all
of our many rules?
Correct.
Okay. Councilor Constant?
I'm not opposed to that, but unfortunately I won't be here next week. I'll be at NLC representing all of us. So I would just ask that it be put on a date that I will be here.
I know we'll have people gone on the 19th. You'll be gone on the 12th. What about the rest of the council?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm all for supporting having all of the members present, especially if folks have an interest in weighing in on this issue. I'm just concerned, given the nature of this legislation, that 26 might be too late for us to weigh in. And not that I suggest that we're City of San Jose's resolution is going to weigh mightily on Congress's mind when they decide this matter. I just would prefer to have the discussion at a relevant time. So I appreciate very much Councilmember Constant not being here. I wasn't aware of that. I was aware of the 19th. So I'm kind of at a loss. I want to accommodate him being there, but again, if the 26th is too late, maybe if we had an opportunity to hear back from Congressmember Lofgren's office prior to the Rules Committee tomorrow, or is that action taken today and they're really too late tomorrow?
Councilmember, we shouldn't be having too much of a discussion on the item because you're not supposed to talk about items that are not on the agenda. So it's a question of direction to the staff and directing staff to put it on a future agenda. So the direction should be place it on a particular agenda.
Then I'll stick with placing it on there, and we could always defer it if we need to prior to that date, given Councilmember Constant's issue.
Does that need to be a motion with a vote?
Unless there's an objection, the direction would go. So if there is an objection, somebody can request a vote.
Okay.
So the direction is to put it on the 12th with cross-reference, unless there's an objection. I see no objection, so that's what we'll do. And we'll get those minutes to the head of the line, and then eventually we'll get caught up, because I know you're furiously working to try to get caught up on that's one of the areas.
And that's for next week, just to confirm.
12th.
Okay.
That is, yes, a week from today. Okay, other items under the open forum, Mr. Wall.
Addressing Councilmember Rocha's issue and Councilmember Campos, the problem with that is that it wasn't a complete resolution, because there's no addition of prosecuting council members, state and federal officials who, by their ministerial acts, have ordered municipal police agencies not to cooperate with the Immigration Customs Enforcement. And through this ministerial act, they've aided and abetted illegal immigration by shielding from detection illegal aliens that are known to be in our midst. And this must mean that we should be able to prosecute civilly and criminally for these violations of what I would call being a good American. As to another issue, the vagrant encampment between West Heading Street and West Taylor, bounded by Coleman Avenue and the Guadalupe River, colloquially known as Camp Chuck Sam. I was out there today. The San Jose police were on foot patrol. I'm very worried about their safety. That area has hidden dangers when you're walking out there that a person could easily break their ankle or fall and injure themselves. I thank the San Jose police for being out there, and you need to call a state of emergency, Mr. Mayor, and have the National Guard or military come in to round up these vagrants throughout the city, especially in Vice Mayor's district, Councilmember KHAMIS' district, and probably other districts that are not known to me at this time. I'd like to thank the city manager for all the hard work she's been doing and trying to hold together an organization that was predicated to fall apart because of a variety of instances that are beyond your control. Thank you, Madam.
Andy Diaz, Carlos Barajas.
How you doing, Mayor? I was going to leave, but I saw there's a full house here, so I thought I'd stay, to talk to everybody. It was concerning the 7.1 item with the water pollution control plant, and I read the paper about how they're having problems retaining people, and I saw Carrie speak on the issue. But it's not been brought up, but the water pollution control plant's a core service, the sewers, and also your municipal water department and Herrera's area. Those are core services: police, fire, and your sewage and your water. That job posting out there for water treatment for plant mechanic and water operators has been open for like 7 months, and it says open till filled. No one's, the supervisor out there, I think his name's Dave Grady, can't even get like qualified applicants. He gets qualified, but not the quality that they need. They're getting a quantity. So if we can't attract quality for the core services of our city, if we can't attract those kind of mechanics and plant operators, I know we're going to go into budget negotiations and all that with the city. Those core services, if you guys we can't attract those employees if we can rate, look at maybe raising the bar for those employees that are in the enterprise fund. They're not in the general fund, so they wouldn't affect that. But just to look at maybe negotiating with the unions there to keep those people so we don't have to pay $1.2 million like Ash said. That's a lot of money to pay to a company from South Carolina when we could be getting a company here from San Jose and putting that money back into the general fund. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Good night.
That concludes the open forum. It is now time for the stair challenge. With the power off, enjoy your afternoon.
Mayor,
City Manager.
Ed needs to make an announcement on
Yes,
the status
Mr.
before
Mayor.
you leave, please.
Members of the council, I could give you a quick update on the power outage, just in actually relative to the meeting, that the audio as well as Granicus has been working, so the council's discussion all the way to the end of the meeting is a part of the record. That's one. Second, we have confirmed from PG&E that it is a PG&E interruption. They're working on switching in order to get power back on. Right now we are running on generators. As such, it's only limited power. The public elevators are currently out, so the staff elevators are working. So staff is working on helping people out of the building, but in all likelihood, the power won't be back on until after 5 o'clock.
I think we're done. We're adjourned.